Hello, I'm the Irredeemable Shag, and I'm here to debrief you on Superman and Batman Magazine #1 from the summer of 1993.
DC Secret Files. DC Secret Files. Dead men and questions and villains so vile. Spectres and manhunters age on the dial. Mysteries, mayhem uncovered in style. Making their way through the pile. One by one we'll go through. DC Secret Files.
D.E.O. update. Fire and Water Network Chief Robert Kelley had reached out to the Department of Extranormal Operations, seeking assistance in having one of their top agents, the Irredeemable Shag, released from a holding facility. Kelley didn't want the network mired in scandal, so he played an interdepartmental telephone game with David Gallagher at the Dome and Gene Hendricks with the National Bureau of Investigation to help spring Shag. The DEO's own Ed Moore helped iron out the details with Chief Branner, and I'd expected to liaison with Hendricks, as this was an NBI compound, but we'd apparently missed one another. Arrangements had still been made to get me into the facility to partially debrief Shag for the DEO, while the final details were ironed out for his release in a couple of hours. I just needed to get the key details on why things had gone sideways at the Themyscira Embassy when all Shag was there to do was participate in JS April festivities.
Look, my comments to that hot chick from the Paradise Island delegation were like totally blown out of proportion, man.
Luckily, Gallagher had been able to play on the sympathies of an old friend of Shag's at the United Nations, the French ambassador Colbert.
I knew Catherine would understand. What a sweetheart. Yeah, she's going to make some lucky guy a great wife someday. But anyway, even before the incident, that whole situation started to go pear-shaped just as soon as I started asking around the Dome about those old superheroes from that list Rob gave me. You know, he's got a long history with the Global Guardians, right?
For all mankind, as they say. But I wasn't here to talk about Rob's super friends. I was more interested in digging deeper into the Golden Age materials that seemed to have landed Shag in hot water. Files so secret, even those in the DC intelligence community like Shag had never heard of them. We had our hands on stuff that is positively arcane. Welcome all to DC Secret Files, a definitive podcast of the DC Universe 1993 through 2011, because Rob and Shag refused to move past 1992. As always, a big thanks to Luke Dobb for our bodacious theme song. On this show, we look at profile pages for various DC Comics characters and then talk about the properties and the art used to illustrate the pages. On this episode, we'll be looking at a span of entries from the Golden Age to the Chromium Age. I'm your host, Diablo Frank, but I won't be going it alone. Joining me is the co-founder of the Fire and Water Podcasting Network and the co-host of the very show that he's barely tolerating my ripping off with this one, Who's Who. Perhaps most importantly, his JSA in the 90s podcast inspired the JS April multimedia crossover event from earlier this year, which launched this very program. Now please direct your favor and your blame at the Irredeemable Shag!
Well, thank you, Frank. I appreciate you inviting me to be here. And of course I refuse to move past 1992. Come on. Like, everything was better in the 90s. I still dress like I'm in the 90s, for goodness sake. Why should I bother to move on to comics after that point?
I have a hyphen for you. Hip hop. Hip to the hippity hip hop did not stop. Yeah, I think definitely that got better after 1992.
Okay, we all know I'm kidding because right now I'm covering comics from 1993 anyway on the JSA in the 90s show. But either way, I am thrilled to be here, Frank. I'm so excited that you decided to use one of those old credit card chunk copy machines and copy our Who's Who show at a much sort of blue, carbon-toned, lesser scale. So I'm excited to be here.
The degradation is apparent. I acknowledge this.
It's a copy of a copy of a copy, man.
Okay, so I know your time is precious and I do value it, so I'm not going to keep you held down doing a bunch of chit chat. You've had to do this over God knows how many hours over the course of the Who's Who podcast anyway. So if you like, we can jump right into covering Superman and Batman Magazine #1, covered in summer 1993. On episodes where we don't have an issue of DC Secret Files and Origins to cover, we like to anchor the discussion on another infotainment periodical. So this time we're going to look at Superman and Batman Magazine, and I'll offer a little background on the folks who put it out. Welsh Publishing Group produced 8 seasonal issues of the magazine between 1993 and 1995, with this one bearing a summer 1993 cover date. Cover price was $2.95 US, $3.95 Canada. Canada never always got the short end of the stick. And this issue was edited by Adam Phillips. Donald Welsh purchased and rebranded the company from a children's magazine publisher he'd been working with in 1987. This followed his stint at Fortune and Rolling Stone, plus his founding of Outside Magazine, still in print today. Welsh publishing group titles include G.I. Joe Magazine, Disney's DuckTales, The Real Ghostbusters, Garfield, Looney Tunes, Tiny Toons Adventures, Simpsons Illustrated, and 3 issues of Don Martin Magazine. Donald Welsh sold the company to Marvel Comics in 1994, but had additional magazine successes elsewhere before passing away in 2010. So, Shag, did you follow any of those Welsh magazines back in the day?
The only one was the Superman Batman magazine, and I bought every issue.
See, I get kind of fuzzy because I know I read the G.I. Joe magazines that my brother bought. I just don't know if those were the Welsh ones or if there was some other company doing those. And I definitely had at least the first issue of Simpsons Illustrated because I believe I still have my copy of that one. And I still have torn pages from the TV guides featuring the illustrations for episodes of The Simpsons when they were still doing that.
Oh my gosh.
Probably not to the favor of the magazine, but, you know, hey, I don't know how many of those are out there. Who else but me would collect Simpsons stuff? I'm sure there's not like a huge groundswell of people that still follow Simpsons to this day.
Well, since we're bad at divergences, I'm going to start one right out of the bat. You mentioned TV guide ads. I wish someone would create a collection of those TV guide ads where they would do original artwork. Right? Like I have a bunch for V, I have a bunch for Misfits of Science. Well, not really in my possession, I'm sorry, digital copies. But I would love to see a whole book of just all that, because there was all these original artwork in TV Guide that no one's seen in 30, 40 years that's just lost to time. But anyway, that's not what we're here for.
Well, I mean, I would love to have that stuff for album art for the Buck Rogers show that I have not produced in several years. But that was a frustration of mine is I knew, like, especially those early episodes, they all would have full color paintings. They were horribly reproduced in tiny proportions, in black and white, with muddy, awful ink. Because, I mean, let's be honest, this was a magazine that was supposed to last for a week and then you threw it away. You know, I was there to find out where the shows were. So yeah, these works are out there and it's like, why does it put a comment here? Like, remember they did all those fantasy art collections back in the 90s and 2000s. I wish they'd do something like that for those TV guide artists.
Yeah, me too. Unfortunately, all the properties are owned by different companies. But anyway,
right? But you'd think you could crowdsource something. You know, I mean, it can't be that hard to license some of the, like Buck Rogers. I'm not thinking is that expensive a license. There's some argument about whether or not it's even under copyright. So, like, give me my Buck Rogers at least.
Yeah, or my Misfits of Science. By goodness, no one cares about that.
And we both want V desperately.
Yep. But Superman and Batman magazine is what we're here to talk about. And let me tell you, I have got right here my issue of #1 in my hot little hand. I have 49 long boxes of comic books. I can't find a single comic book if somebody asked me. This Superman Batman magazine #1, I found it in less than 6 seconds. I knew exactly where to go.
Because you only have the one box of magazines?
No, because it's sitting out in my office. Like it's actually accessible right where I can get to it.
So why for though?
Because I'm lazy and I have a box of random things I want to go through again someday. And it's in that box of random things I want to go through again someday.
I'm just really glad that it worked out for you, though. And by extension, me. We'll take a little look at this, baby. So it's kind of an interesting cover situation here. Because it does say Superman and Batman magazine on the cover, and you sure enough have Batman and Superman kind of sweeping down toward like coming down from a higher place into a cityscape. And you don't really have context for this, but you do have Superman and Batman right there on the cover. And it's not until you start opening stuff up that you realize there's a lot more to it than that.
I'm still here, but I'm looking something up. I figured you'd still fill air, but okay. Interesting. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, so then you open it up and it's a gatefold and you've got a very long, like Barbie doll proportioned Wonder Woman also leaping down the same general direction. They're all moving toward a central point from up high. You've got a really close-up shot of Hal Jordan flying down. You've got Wally West, I assume, Flash running down the side of a building. You've got the very Hawkworld Hawkman in the distance. Tim Drake Robin. You've got the Beetle Bug, Power Girl in her Atlantean outfit, which makes a whole lot less sense now than it used to. Not that it made a lot of sense then. And then, of course, the original Captain Marvel, Shazam's flying down as well. But there's still a lack of context for this thing.
Well, first of all, did you say the artist Ty Templeton? Because, I mean, this thing is stunning. It's absolutely gorgeous. Ty Templeton, of course, was drawing Batman Adventures, with Mike Parobeck at the time. And it's a gorgeous piece of work. But the most amazing thing about this, and I had to just look this up, is Batman, the animated series, was the only Timverse property out there at this point. The Superman animated series didn't start till 1996. So look at Superman. That Superman is completely on model from the Superman animated series version, isn't it?
Well,
And
I mean, they really missed the trick by not having the mullet on the cartoon. That would have been so timeless.
Sure, but I mean, the mullet came later in this magazine series anyway, not in issue 1. And Wonder Woman, I mean, yes, she's extremely stretched out, but otherwise, she looks pretty close to on model for how she looked in Justice League Unlimited. Flash looks pretty close to the way he looked. So it's sort of amazing that Templeton was able to, cast forward in time and figure out how these characters were going to be adapted for the animated universe, and he nailed them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and truly, they're going for the more iconic looks anyway, so it makes sense. But, like, I'm never going to get this Wonder Woman animated series. Like, we're past the point where I'll ever get this version of Wonder Woman that I care about. She'll have a skirt. She'll have a blade. She'll have a heavy mythological theme. She won't be a part of the proper DC superhero universe like she would have been back then. I really mourn for the series that's indicated by this artwork that's never going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, the closest we ever got was, obviously Justice League, but you get Superman Batman magazine that goes for 8 issues if I recall. Then, and I had completely forgotten this until I started doing the research, we had that 23 issue series, whatever it was, Adventures in the DC Universe. Yeah, which was also like their animated versions of a bunch of characters and them kind of guessing is this what Fire and Ice would look like in the Timverse and things like that. And it's sort of amazing how well they typically projected what these characters would look like under the animated series banners.
It always helps when you go back to that iconic state. But also, like you said, there's more to just, okay, well, I'm drawing the costume and a stylist. Like, Tim was somewhat established as an artist in the 80s, but not to the degree where, like, you can just, like, picture what a Timverse character would look like because you've seen so many different ones at this point. Like I said, anticipating that look, getting it in the right style, they really nailed it here. They did a great job.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous cover. I love it.
But it's not just a cover, because then if you bought the book and you open the bag up, you find out that it's actually a poster, and that what they're running towards at the bottom is Mr. Mixer-Spitalik, Goldface, Trickster, Dr. Savannah, Cheetah, Catwoman, Star Sapphire, Captain Cold, Anarchy, the Joker, the Penguin, and Eclipso, the freaking Bart Sears Eclipso, definitely not in his iconic state, all getting into mischief on the streets below. There's also a LexCorp billboard featuring the Aussie Alexander Luthor Jr. So it's funny to watching, you got the iconic versions of the characters, but you also have extremely other time versions of these characters intermingling.
But could it be any more 1993?
Oh, right. Could it be more? All the characters are drawn in the animated Timverse style, as you said, by Ty Templeton with colors by Tom McCraw.
And I loved that poster. I actually had that poster hanging on my wall for so many years, Frank. I mean, just probably 10, 15 years, that thing hung on my wall. Absolutely loved it. And it's somewhere in a box somewhere. I love that design and poster. It looks great.
I love Batman. I love Superman. I just wish we'd gotten even more. And obviously, more seasons of Justice League Unlimited would have helped to scratch that itch. I'm glad we got what we got. I'm thankful we got what we got. But of course, it was so good going out that give me some more, please,
Right. I mean, and that's what this magazine excited me about. It wasn't so much Superman and Batman, honestly. It was more about seeing the other characters. Seeing the other characters from the DC Universe and how they got adapted is what got me excited. Because, Batman, sure, I was going through my Batman phase, of course. And Superman, I loved Superman. But the other characters, just the Bart Sears Eclipso? Yes, please. I want to see that. Yes.
I like the Timverse version, but I kind of like this one better. So. And then the inside front cover, we've got action figures from Batman, The Eyes of Justice, the animated series. So they're clearly going great guns with the action figures based on the first of those cartoon shows. And then you've got sweepstakes to get on Batman the Ride, which I think will come up later on. We have a message from the Batcave, which is basically Robin saying, hey, check this magazine out. And Batman being like, you're right, I will check this magazine out.
I can't believe you skipped the full-page ad for the Aliens 3 Super NES game. Like, given your Aliens podcasting, I thought that'd be right up your alley.
Hey, I'm glad you watched my back on that front, but I'm not probably going to run that ad. I've got a couple of years to run. And then, of course, we've got a Bark 2. I mean, Bark's is barely even out there anymore, but I remember this ad because it was such a novelty where they have all this 50s advertising artwork, and they're offering to put proper classic 50s styles tattoos on a child's body. It's kind of a crazy way to go, but it was an interesting angle that they went with there.
Hey, you got to try something to separate yourself from everybody else.
Okay, so now it's time to start looking at entries. Let me read, and this is the thing I've been struggling with. So I've had this big book on the desk the entire time and trying to work around it and not doing a very good job of it.
Are you getting your Jeff Roven book?
Yeah.
I'll get mine. Hold on. I've had this thing Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Well, let me see. What year was it published? That's it. 19. I've had this since like 1985. I've had it, or maybe it was 86 when I got it. I should save this for the year. Never mind. Go ahead.
Okay, well, here, I'll go ahead and set you up. Okay. So our first entry this episode is Amazing Man. As discussed on Don Markstein's Tunipedia, Amazing Man was the second Superman alike out of the gate, after Fox's slavish plagiarism, Wonder Man, which was sued out of existence after a single issue. Bill Everett made Amazing Man more of a bridge from the pulps to the Man of Steel, who himself owed a large debt to the Man of Bronze. This allowed Amazing Man to flourish for a whole 3 years, which crushes Wonder Man's record, but comes in well short of Everett's more famous creation, Namor the Submariner. I was going to read from the Jeff Robin Encyclopedia of Superheroes. Do you happen to have a copy of that, though?
I sure do, Frank. I have my copy right here. My mother went to Washington, D.C. to go see an exhibit for some Smithsonian's with my grandmother. And they came across this book, maybe in a Smithsonian, I'm not sure. But my mom decided I needed to have this, got it for me, and it's either like 85 or 86, somewhere around there. And man, I lived in this book. Because, I had my Who's Who, sure. But this book went beyond Who's Who. So I constantly looked up characters in this book growing up all the time.
What's funny about books like this is that your DC and your Marvel guys you could get a hold of pretty easily most of the time. Like if you were enticed by something like in the Great Comic Book Heroes, you could go and find something along those lines still on the shelf somewhere. But there's all these characters that just did not exist at this point in history anymore. And so you only know them through these references. A lot of times there's no illustrations. This is not a picture-heavy book. So to some degree, you're having to conjure a mental image of who these people are based on the descriptions. Although thankfully they do tell you like what costume colors and elements of the costume and stuff. So they help you to visualize it. But this is such arcane knowledge, especially to kids who didn't have access to the internet, to trade paperbacks, to any of this stuff. That these might as well have been characters somebody came up with for a Mayfair game or something, because you had no access to these things, and you're just having to rely on them to tell you that these things existed at some point in history.
Well, that's actually what I would do for Mayfair games. Whenever we used to create our own characters, and every time I came to the new character, I'd look in the book to make sure the name didn't already exist somewhere, because if like I had to be unique for some reason, right? So I would always look to make sure there wasn't already a Damascus Steel or whatever character I came up with.
Cool. So do you actually have any recollections of doing any of that with Amazing Man specifically?
No, but I'm looking at the entry right now, and I'd like to read you his quote if I could. "My supply of bombs is getting low, and it's still many kilometers to Berlin."
Wasn't that from Captain America: The First Avenger?
I think Steve Rogers did say that, yeah.
So this fellow is John Amon, and do you want to read his biography right quick?
Sure. Do you want me to read it from Jeff Robin, or do you want me to read it from this 37-page Google Doc?
Jeff Robin will do, thanks.
Okay, here we go. A dramatic reading from the Jeff Robin book. Around the time of World War I, a young orphan is selected by the Council of Seven, that's in capital letters, high in the peaks of Tibet, to be taken under their wing and trained to perfection. The process takes many years, but by the time he's 25, young John Amman has awesome strength and invulnerability, as well as the ability to become a green mist, because that makes sense. After passing a grueling series of tests, a tug of war with an elephant, fighting a cobra using only his teeth, having a knife flown through his throat, I love there's a little exclamation point right here in the thing, and answering 1,000 diversified questions involving the languages of all the civilized and uncivilized countries, he is finally allowed to head back to America, where he fights crime as the aptly named Amazing Man. During the war, he fights on the side of the Allies. His sidekick, Tommy the Amazing Kid, was introduced in Amazing Man number 23. There you go.
Amazing Man's nemesis was the Great Question, his rival at the Lamasery, who continues to wreak havoc on John's life and the greater world. John's girlfriend was reporter Zona Henderson, whose kid brother Tommy became Amazing Man's costume sidekick for 3 whole issues. The original run of Amazing Man comics numbered 26, but subtracting the 4 issues under another title, that's 22 usually cover featured appearances for our hero. Then add 5 of Stars and Stripes' 6 issues, which by Byzantine slum publisher logic had no first issue. The debut was the closest Amazing Man got to fronting a period team, as Mighty Man, the Shark, Iron Skull, and Reef Kincaid marched behind him, but it was only for the cover. Further overtures toward a shared universe were left to the numerous reprintings of this material, like Mike Macklin's swell Silver Age cover to AC Comics Men of Mystery number 83 in 2010.
And who created this character, Frank?
Bill Everett.
Wow, is there an interesting connection with perhaps a subsequent character named Amazing Man then?
Right after John Amon's entry in the Jeff Rovin Encyclopedia is Amazing Man 2, no hyphen, the retconned African-American superhero created by Roy Thomas for 1983's All-Star Squadron number 23. I'll admit that it was a cheat to include Bill Everett's Amazing hyphen Man in a DC podcast, since he never properly appeared in a DC comic, although Roy stuck him into Saga the Submariner at Marvel. However, DC's Will Everett took both John Amon's superheroic name and his creator's Christian one, so I think it rates mention here.
I never put that together. So Amazing Man from All-Star Squadron, who we all adore with the great green and yellow costume, his name was Will Everett, and that name was, of course, Roy Thomas did a nod to Golden Age creator, and the nod is to Bill Everett, who created the previous Amazing Man, which is just great. I never had any idea about that until I was reading your notes, Frank.
He's never had any significant representation in DC comic books, despite being public domain. Anybody can use them. They chose not to. They chose to come up with a new character, but obviously hugely indebted to this version, so I still see the continuity there. And of course, I was introduced through Will Everett from All-Star Squadron. I would see those on the spinner rack at Jimco and such. So I knew that guy long before I knew the predecessor.
I got to talk about his sidekick, Amazing Boy, right? You know, here's Amazing Man. He's got all these powers and everything. And then he goes running around with Amazing Boy, who's just a kid. And they really emphasize the fact that the boy has no powers whatsoever. Now, I know Bucky and Robin and all that, but come on. They're just asking for trouble for some kid to be running around in like no clothes and cross straps just to get killed. It's just going to end poorly for Amazing Boy. I'm sorry.
Well, and again, he spent 25 years of his life to get to the point where he could turn into a green mist or whatever. Maybe we should see him like teach the kid throughout the series or something. Like give us some indication that you're at least trying to get this kid anywhere near your Amazing Man level.
Right. And I do like the secret identity of his last name, Amon, A-M-A-N, you know, as in like a man, as an amazing man. Very clever there, Bill Everett. Well done.
Now, have you encountered this character in any comic books?
No, this is the first time I ever heard of him. I had to look him up in the Jeff Rovin book. Only exposure I've ever had to him.
Because Centaur Publications was one of the first comic lines to bite the dust, it also pioneered orphaning comic works into the public domain. And so Amazing Man was among the earliest and oft-revived Golden Age superheroes. Most notably, he was incorporated into Malibu Comics' Centaur-centric Genesis line. The redesign was uninspired, covering John Amon mostly in yellow, adding a domino mask, and keeping the matching boxers and boots. The limp offering was probably due to his premeditated sacrifice to the stunt gods, as it was Amazing Man who was shot through the chest in 1993's The Protectors number 5, seen on the infamous cover with a punch hole entry wound passing through the entire comic. As seen in liquidation bins for 32 years and counting. Jerry Bingham drew this version in The Protector's Handbook, the Centaur Revival's one-issue Who's Who. In Claremontian parlance, he swiftly got better, appearing in 25 comics during this iteration, right up until this entire version of Earth was destroyed in 1994. Did you ever read any of the Malibu Protectors comic books or any of that, the Genesis line, I guess they called it back then?
I probably read an issue or two, because we used to do this thing when I managed the comic shop where the owner would pay us $1 to read some comic we've never read before. Like a lot, not just like an issue of Superman, but like, you know, go find a comic series you've never read before. And he would do this periodically and say, okay, I'm going to get, you know, you go read comics you've never read before, write them all down, give me the list, I'll pay $1 for every comic you read. I read 100 comics I'd never read before, man. I was not stupid. So I'm sure in that collection, Protectors or was in there somewhere, had to be, right? Because I mean, that was always on the shelves.
Sure, and since you were slinging the comic books in that time period, do you remember that gimmick cover where the guy had a bullet shot through his body and he's got like the blood spot in the middle and the entire comic book has that hole punch throughout it?
You know, I don't remember. I remember the one... No, I don't remember that one. I remember lots of gimmick covers. I don't remember that one, though.
Yeah, well, that was their version of Amazing Man getting shot through the chest.
Oh my gosh.
Amazing Man was next revived in a more faithful but less prolific version for Dynamite Comics' Project Superpowers line of books, governed by Alex Ross. This version had 3 lousy appearances from 2008 through 2011, paltry in both quantity and quality, as was the way of that dunder-headed and cynical initiative. More recently, Amazing Man has worked the nostalgic vanity press pretty hard. Most notably, Gallant Comics released a half dozen issues of John Amon, Amazing Man, by professional writer-artist Stephen Butler, who you may remember from 90s Spider-Man comics, or the related series Silver Sable and the Wild Pack.
Oh yeah.
That run netted Amazing Man his own crowd-funded action figure, still available from the maker at $10 each, with bulk discounts of up to $5 a piece if you want to help sell the 500 edition run.
Wow, that's impressive. And hey, Stephen Butler, I loved his stuff from the 90s.
I still do. I love this stuff.
Yeah.
He's not, I think he's one of the original guys. I think he's out of like Kansas or someplace. So I never see him at cons, but I'd love to get a piece from him one of these days.
Yeah,
I
very
always
cool.
like his stuff. Amazing Man has dipped in at a number of other publishers in the 2010s, though, including Angry Bear Press, Thrilling Nostalgia Comics, and even France's Organic Comics. Despite being free to use, Amazing Man has not been seen in any significant multimedia offerings. Our reference for this entry is from Temporal Comics' Heroes of the Public Domain, Reference Guide number 1, printed in 2018. It was written by Jesse Beretta, laid out by Darren Wiltshire, with art by Chris Malgrain. It offers the nearly nude original Wonder Man, looking real mad, arms and legs spread far apart, with his twin fist reared back at waist level. And I will say too.
Now you said Wonder Man. You mean Amazing Man?
I did say Wonder Man. My bad. Yeah. You know what? I think I was screwing up because you've got the Wonder Man that was canceled before you got progressed. So good catch. Thank you for that.
So this art entry you've given us to reference from Temporal Comics Heroes is, he looks a lot like He-Man owes him a debt of gratitude. It looks like to me. It's a very He-Man-like shtick.
I think that's the artist coming through as opposed to, like, when you look at the original comic books, he doesn't quite look like that. This is definitely an artist sort of taking liberties.
Gotcha.
As I mentioned, there's been a whole bunch of uses of Amazing Man throughout comic books history because he went out of copyright very early on. He was one of the first characters to ever go out of copyright. And so people have been doing stuff with him for ages. And I don't know if this is any particular person's version of this, but it's not quite on model. Like, obviously they're going to make him really muscular, which is not a thing that they did so much back in the golden age. You know, you tend to have much more of a lean build. So I don't really see Amazing Man when I look at the artwork, unfortunately. What he really looks like, he looks like the store brand, like Remco or like the Kmart brand knockoff of He-Man as opposed to the real He-Man. He's a little too plain to be He-Man. You can definitely tell too that you could easily swap out his bandolier and the head and have like 3 other figures that are the exact same body mold.
It's like the Captain Action of Golden Age characters here. So I assume that's a Bill Everett drawing beneath that. And yeah, you can see it's the much more larger, thicker straps, and the A looks more like a shield and things like that. I totally get it. Yeah.
And also, I do like this character type. I like these guys who get so learned in both their physical and mental disciplines that they become superheroes just from having studied so hard. You know, it's a very nerdy thing to do. I don't have a ton of experience with Amazing Man personally, but I did get into Peter Cannon Thunderbolt, who is pretty much a carbon copy of Amazing Man. And also they integrated Amazing Man into Marvel Comics. They renamed him the Prince of Orphans, and he appears in the 2008 Immortal Iron Fist series, which I believe was by Brubaker Fraction, and was it AHA, I think?
Oh, wow. Okay. I mean, that's a really well-regarded run of him off Iron Fist. So that's cool. And I hadn't thought about the Peter Cannon Thunderbolt kind of idea, but that makes a lot of sense.
So anyway, Barks, man, when he drinks Barks, he gets all these superpowers because of the bite.
I'm sorry, but you were saying?
So Barks, man, he's got these superpowers, right? But they're more realistic, you know? He can hear things that normal people can't. Like, is that the phone? There could be trouble.
Oh, I know. Yeah, hearing is so important. Can he fly?
No, but he speed walks, you know? You ever see those guys on TV?
No, I can't say that I have. Well, actually, I can say that I have, but if I did, I would be flying. Sir?
Now, for a limited time only, get a free cassette tape from Barks with all these heavy metal bands. Send 3 barcodes from the 2-liter or 12-pack of Barks Root Beer to Barks Metal Bites Cassette, P.O. Box 158, Malibu, California, 90265.
I am vengeance. I am the knight. I am Batman!
You need to take out the trash.
I don't have time for that now. We have 2 podcasts I have to create a new promo for.
What? Both WildC.A.T.s and Supermates?
Yes, WildC.A.T.s, where you and I discussed the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited animated series from Bruce Timm and Company.
And Supermates, our original show where we talk about all sorts of geeky stuff, including our annual House of Frankenstein series on classic horror films. Yeah.
That's it. But how do we combine this into one promo?
I have no idea, but it sounds like we're doing our original Supermates promo all over again.
I kind of think we are, but hey, other folks kind of aped it, so it must have worked.
Well, why don't you get to work taking out the trash and I'll finish up.
Great.
So join us, Cindy.
And Chris.
on JLU-Cast and Supermates, both proudly part of the Fire and Water Podcast Network, found at fireandwaterpodcast.com and on iTunes.
And then we've got the Daily Planet supplement, which is literally like new stuff. And of course, I made a terrible mistake. One of the first things I did when I was starting this project was to read these things as though I'm going to remember all these articles months on when we actually record on it. But you've got something that's basically a VR headset, but they don't have the dimensions. So it's essentially like, oh, it's like watching a TV screen from 8 feet away, but it's right in front of your eyes. And that's all it does. And it only costs, what was it, $900?
$900.
I don't even want to do the adjusted value of that.
What I love about this thing, it's like reading, I don't know if you were a kid, we'd get things in school like the Scholastic Newsreader or something like that, and it was like news stories for kids. And that's basically what this is. I mean, it's a news story about some science-y gimmick thing that's out there, and it's just barely attached to a superhero theme at all. They just kind of get it out of the way in the first paragraph, say, yeah, superheroes love, I don't know, like Aquaman is in the water. Let me tell you about some guy that surfs, or whatever. So I think it's a clever way to do that. Most importantly, though, we have to call out the ad, or not ad, a little story all about Pogs. Remember, Frank, when we both worked at comic book stores and Pogs were going to be the hottest thing? Well, here you've got the Reign of the Supermen SkyBox Pogs. And I love somewhere in here the wording. It says, oh gosh, it may be the next hot thing. I love how they're not even sure themselves. Mm-hmm. It may be the next hot thing.
Well, do you remember what the whole thing was with milk caps?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a thing in Hawaii where the kids there had milk caps because that's how they got their milk. And so they made a game out of it. And they were trying to completely divorce that from its culture of origin and bring it over here and make it a thing. And of course, it was never a thing. And yet I sold slammers. And I want to say, like, in my mind, I picture Pokemon, but it would have been too soon for Pokemon. I believe it would have been too soon for Dragon Ball. So I don't remember what was on the things, but I definitely remember selling slammers. I remember having some Pogs. I don't remember selling much in the way of Pogs, but the slammers the kids would actually pick up from me now and again.
I even remember what Pog stood for. Passion Orange Guava. That was the drink in Hawaii you could get. So yeah, we sold the ones that came in packages and stuff like that. And then we would buy, like, I don't know, from the Oriental Trading Company, like a bag of 1,000 random Pogs, and they'd just be stupid designs or something. We'd have those, and we'd sell those for like a nickel or something, just to have, so kids could buy stacks of these things. Because, you're supposed to, like, attack each other with them or whatever, so, or knock over each other's piles or whatever. So anyway, I love the Daily Planet articles. I just think they're so cute. I wish I was a little kid and could read these, because I would love them.
I do love too, like, oh, surfing like Aquaman. It occurs to me, as much aquatic stuff as Aquaman does, I don't remember him ever actually surfing at any point. Why would he?
He does stand on dolphins sometimes.
That's more like ski boarding, though. That's
true.
Not really,
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's not surfing. The one that I like the best is the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry doing a relating science to superhero activities, which they've done whole books of at this point. And I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. It's like, oh, this is how it would really work if people could fly unaided, even though people can't fly unaided. But just like seeing their mock-up of the Gotham City and their little standees for Batman and stuff, it's like, I totally want to tour this thing. I want to travel down to this thing.
I got into the articles last night when I was rereading this thing.
And then we've got a Spacewalking Made Safer, which is an acronym for Simplified Aid for EVA Rescue, which is basically just a different way of doing the PACs to push astronauts around when they're doing spacewalks and stuff. There's an article on boomerangs. There's an article on, what is this one right here? Oh, Controlled Entropy, which again was a choose your own adventure kind of situation, but you're doing it in a movie theater. And I think what would happen is the majority of the audience would get their pick. They figure out the ratio of how many people, whoever the majority was, the movie would continue to progress in the way that they wanted to do, which is very much a thing I'm sure they would love to be able to do today still, is like, tell us what movie you want so that we can make money off of you, and you will actually come to a theater with, to watch this thing. It's funny seeing all the way back then, it's like still trying to find those William Castle gimmicks that get people to come into theaters, and still kind of playing with that stuff today. So we'll move on to our next character, Icon.
Woohoo!
Icon is an alien who crash landed on Earth over 150 years ago. Though he originally hid the enhanced strength and senses, ability to fly, and resistance to injury bestowed to his alien-human genetic mix, an alien trapped on Earth, Icon still feels most comfortable in the guise of Augustus Freeman IV, well-to-do corporate lawyer. Due to his longevity, he tries to maintain his distance from people. However, he has found close relationships unavoidable. His somber nature is a result of many personal losses, including his beloved wife Estelle and the homeworld he left behind. Icon was created in 1992 by Milestone Media. It's tricky because all of the founders were involved in the development of the line. Writer Christopher Priest, then Jim Owsley, has stated, I created the basic premise and backstory for Paragon, later Icon. Estelle, Icon's wife, is based on my late grandmother, Estelle Young. As the principal designer of the line, Dennis Cowan likely came up with Icon's iconography. Dwayne McDuffie and Mark D. Doc Bright were the creators on the actual book from the May 1993 dated first issue through most of the run. Michael Davis and Derek T. Dingle likely also contributed. Do you have any experience with Icon?
Absolutely, man. I was there on the ground floor when the Milestone book started. I tried them all and only stuck with some. I stuck with, if I remember correctly, Icon, Hardware, and off and on Static. It's like I liked Static, I just didn't stick with a book. But Hardware and Icon were the two I enjoyed the most.
So tell folks the basics of Icon then.
Well, so the gist of it is he's this alien who crash lands on Earth back in, what is it, like the 1800s, I believe it is. Actually, you know what? I'm going to have to look at this origin real quick. Does he crash in Africa and become a slave, or does he crash
No,
on a slave plantation?
he's in the southern United States. He
Okay,
lands on a
let me try.
plantation. Reading from the flavor text on the cards, the story of Icon began over 150 years ago with a catastrophic accident on board a Pulsar-class star cruiser. With only seconds to act before losing ship integrity and all hope, Captain Itofgahai decided to abandon ship, jettisoning as many of the passengers and crew as possible before the ship detonated. Survivors were scattered across hundreds of light years of uncharted space. One was stranded on Earth. Icon's crash pod was jettisoned at translight speed, its sensor array scanning the vast reaches of space for the minimal conditions required to ensure passenger survival. It found them on a little blue planet circling a G-class. Okay, it was Earth. A fault in the ship's main inertial disruptor resulted in a very rough landing. Emergency subsystems kept Icon and several key crash pod systems intact. The year is 1839. Icon's crash pod lit up the skies of a rural plantation in the American South. A young slave named Miriam braved the landing site to find a bizarre metal structure containing a perfect little African baby inside. Shortly after she retrieved the baby, the crash pod's remaining auto systems kicked in, and it carefully buried itself, leaving almost no traces. A device in Icon's crash pod had reconfigured his DNA, analyzing the nearest sentient being, maximizing and adapting it to fit. Icon's people rightly assumed that a strange infant had a better chance of being accepted than a strange adult. Thus, Icon learned firsthand about life at the bottom rung of humanity. Though life as a slave was harsh, his adoptive mother's stories of her homeland convinced him of mankind's potential. Icon lived through one of the most turbulent times in American history. After the traumatic sale of his mother to another plantation, he began to work with the Underground Railroad.
And then he goes on to fight in the Civil War for the North.
During Reconstruction, he went to college, studied law, and eventually reclaimed possession of his crash pod. After the Civil War, Icon spent many years searching the countryside for his adoptive family, finally reuniting with them shortly before his mother's death. Shocked by the brevity of human life compared to his own, he would avoid close relationships with humans for many years after. Instead, he would settle down in a variety of communities for brief periods, always moving on before forming any close ties. During the Harlem Renaissance, Icon met and married Estelle Jackson, with whom he eventually shared his every secret. Life with Estelle renewed his interest in humanity, but he became disillusioned following the failed promise of both the Harlem era and the post-World War II years. Estelle would keep him in touch with the civil rights movement from the 1950s to the 1970s, until her death in 1977 from cancer. After Estelle's death, Icon became more reclusive than ever before, throwing himself into his work and little else. His law firm prospered even as he redoubled his efforts to find technology suitable to repair his crash pod. His hermitage and conservative ideals were recently shattered when his world was invaded by a would-be burglar. This was his first encounter with the angry, idealistic Rocket. Icon's course of action against the teen bandits who invaded his home should have been clear. Instead, his self-assurance was rattled by the impassioned arguments of Rocket.
There's this young girl who sort of brings him out of his shell and gets him to become a superhero, and he becomes sort of essentially the Superman of the Dakota universe.
Her desire for humanity's betterment, so like his dead wife Estelle's, inspired him to take an active role in his adopted people's history. But this time, he intends to work more openly, symbolizing, as Icon, the best that humanity can be. I will say that Rocket's pretty much the star of the book. That's one of the things that's kind of tricky is like you've got all this backstory to Icon, but when you're reading the book, it's really Rocket's book featuring Icon.
Yeah, I mean, she's kind of like the Jubilee. You know, she's the energetic young go-getter, except you're right. She was more the star. She was really the driving force because he was very passive. Like, no one thing about when I read all this information you provided, right? And what I realized is it didn't really give you a clue of his personality. And I seem to remember, even though he was essentially the Superman of that universe, he wasn't a Superman clone. Wasn't his personality very aloof and standoffish, if I remember right?
Yeah, he was very reserved. It was one of the things that kind of played into his backstory is he wanted to keep a low profile. He knew that he was stranded on this somewhat savage land, and he didn't want any problems. He didn't want to direct a lot of attention to himself, so he was just very low-key, very, very quiet, laid-back kind of dude. Probably too much so, which is one of the arguments that's made in the series. Like, you could have stepped up earlier is one of the things they talk about a little bit in the series.
Well, I remember it being a lot of fun. I remember sticking with it for a long time. It was a good book.
Icon appeared in 42 issues of his eponymous title through the end of the initial Milestone line in 1997. He guested in 13 other comics from the imprint, including Hardware, Static, The Long Hot Summer, Milestone Forever, Zombie, and Cobalt. In the greater DC universe, mostly as part of the Worlds Collide crossover, he appeared in issues of Superman, Steel, Superman the Man of Steel, and Superboy.
But, we would be grievously mistreating the audience if we didn't mention the color forms. I'm just saying, the color forms for, was it Worlds Collide, I think is what it was called, was just the best.
Yeah, you had that one cover where you actually had the background under which you could hear them and create your own scenes. Mm-hmm. Well, and again, that's something, I don't know even in the 90s if the kids cared about that sort of thing anymore, but if you grew up in the 70s, when we really even before, I think color forms predate action figures, right?
Probably. I don't really know. I mean, they go back a long way, yeah.
Yeah, but you had color forms as a kid, right?
Absolutely. So what it was designed to do, because these were like not the stuff you bought on the newsstand, you had to go to the comic shop to buy this deluxe version of the cover. So yeah, they were absolutely hitting the market of kids who grew up with color forms in the 70s, but are now adults with disposable cash in the 90s, and are like, yay, color forms with Milestone characters, yes, and Lobo, yes, please.
Yeah, and if you didn't grow up in the 70s, color forms were these little plastic, so usually I think single color drawings, and you would be given like a board game sized image that was glossy, and you could adhere these little plastic things to the image and create your own scenes and stuff. There's like a static thing or something.
I will pay you $10 if there's a single person listening to this show that under 45 years old.
Safe bet. In quasi-animated form, Icon took part in a Milestone-themed issue of Superman and Batman magazine.
There's also like a slight resurgence in like 2007, 2008, somewhere around there, where they kind of came back for a little while as well.
During a short-lived attempt to integrate Milestone into the DC universe in 2009, Icon appeared in a run of Justice League of America issues written by Dwayne McDuffie, plus an issue of Final Crisis. As of this writing, there's still an ongoing Milestone revival in which a redesigned Icon figures prominently, but this show's coverage stops at Flashpoint. By the way, do you have any experience with Icon in multimedia?
No, but I would Didn't some of the Milestone characters make it into like Young Justice or something like that?
In this case, yes. So Icon was voiced by Candyman himself, the late Tony Todd, in 2 episodes of the Cartoon Network's Young Justice cartoon, and Icon appeared in related comic books.
Okay.
Because they did the cartoons, and then the comics did adaptations of the cartoons in the comic books, so that whole incestuous thing.
Yes.
This entry goes all in on the varied references. We're using 1993's SkyBox Milestone, the Dakota Universe trading cards numbered 1 through 9, 24, and 94. 9 of those form a single montage image of Icon's origin, including interior and anterior of the interstellar cruise ship failing, and his escape pods crash landing on the plantation. The second row is his early human childhood raised by the slave Miriam, his own auctioning, service to the Union Army, and visiting Miriam's grave. The last row is a framed picture of Augustus's wife on a nightstand, the failed robbery, and headshots of Icon and Rocket. You had that first issue. Do you recognize the art for the Secret Files entry?
Well, yeah. I mean, besides the fact that you've listed out here exactly what it is. Now, it says here that the artwork is by... Yes, help me out, because the names aren't here. It's is it M.D. Bright? Is that his name?
M.D. Bright was the artist on the series. That's correct.
Yep.
I think it's Mark Bright, Mark D. Bright, Doc Bright. He had a lot of different names he went by.
Yes. Now, what you've given us here, this like makes my heart sing. It is a 9-pocket trading card set that tells the origin of Icon across 9 cards, which is great. See, this is a great piece and tells the origin. And this is the kind of thing I loved in the 90s, was getting a piece like this. This is great. And then Mark Bright art, I've got a lot of complaints to throw his way when he drew Green Lantern, the Hal Jordan years. But man, this is great. This is so stunning. But
I was actually, and you're right, this is the... In the Milestone Universe trading card set, they did the 9-pocket grid that shows the origin, and then the backside gives you the story in chunks. But I was actually meaning the character card, not the origin card. I will say, too, one thing that's very frustrating about that grid is if you want to see the image in your 9 pockets, you have to put them out of order because they screwed up on the collation from front to back. And so the back doesn't matches where the front should be.
Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, so you're talking about the actual individual card. Is that a Dennis Cowan, maybe?
I believe so, but more to the point, if you got the first issue of the comic books, it came with that little backer card that gave you an information on the character stuff. That's the same art. They recycled it on there. Then there's a card with Icon standing with 1 foot on urban rubble, his huge cape blowing in the wind.
So were they all, was this, okay, because again, I know I bought them, but it's been 30, 40, or whatever, how many years now. So I guess they were polybagged. Is that what happened?
Yeah, they were all polybagged, and they had, they created little icons for each character. I think that they might have done the O-ring for the icon because of his cape. And so they put that all over the baggie. And then in the bag was this, a backer board for a comic book backer board, but it had artwork on it and a synopsis of who the character was.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. No recollection of that whatsoever.
And I try to see too, they don't actually have credits on the cards. I'm pretty sure that's a Mark Bright on the icon card, but there's also an Augustus Freeman card that's definitely Dennis Cowan. Finally, there's a card of Augustus Freeman standing in an expensive suit with his hands in his pockets against an orange background. Definitely, almost certainly from the character development.
Gotcha. Looks great. Dennis Cowan drawing a guy in a suit. Yes, please. It looks so cool.
Well, and my understanding is that he was a snazzy dresser in real life too.
Ah, okay. Nice. I would expect no less.
And the other thing I'll mention is that Icon was one of the rare conservative black characters in comics. The Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was actually a fan of the Icon series.
Wow. I had no idea. Okay.
Yeah. Neither did Dwayne McDuffie, and he was a little horrified by that because his politics didn't align. But, there's a comic out there for everybody, even Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas.
I guess so.
So from there, we move on to the origin of Superman.
Wait, Frank, I got a question for you.
Sure, go ahead.
Because you skipped Penguin's puns.
Oh, no, I tried.
Why is it better to be Catwoman than a frog?
I don't know, Shag. Why is it better to be Catwoman than a frog?
Because Catwoman has 9 lives, but a frog croaks all the time. I actually like that joke. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
There's a whole page of really dumb jokes, supposedly by the Penguin. I love it. Penguin's puns.
I like that joke, but not for reasons that I want to go into on an all ages podcast.
Oh, good Lord. Just move on.
So then we're on to the origin of Superman, which is an actual comic strip story. It's fairly short. It's 6-8 pages, something like that. And it's by Karl Kesel. Is it Kesel or Kesel? I've never understood.
I think it's Kesel. Okay. I met the man. He didn't correct me, but.
And then Mike Parobeck and company. I'm just going to read off the Grand Comics database synopsis. Lois Lane recounts Superman's origin from Krypton to Smallville and on to his debut in Metropolis, encountering some of his most iconic foes and finally revealing his secret identity to her. So this is a really solid little recap of basically the Byrne era, like the Triangle era up to this point. So you could basically go from this to the comic books, which I'm sure is a pipeline they were trying to lay down.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much it's right up until, now this was done in 93, but it covers right up until before his death. Absolutely. Now, interesting, they did not get Lois correct for what she would look like in the cartoon, but still, it looks great. I mean, it's Parobeck. Now, did you see that Kessel's inking him as well? Which is
no,
great.
I didn't catch that. Yeah, nice.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful piece. It's colored really nicely. Because when they would do these magazines, the coloring sometimes almost looks more painted than you would get in a comic book. I don't know. Or maybe there's just transitions of color more so. But it just looks gorgeous. It's a beautiful... and it's Mike Parobeck. Come on, the guy's a genius.
Just love seeing Mike Parobeck draw of all things, the weird ancient robot mummy thing from Superman Byrne number 6. And I think he's redoing one of the covers that either Perez or Ordway did with Mr. Mixer-Spitalik. I dig that it's again, like you say, it's very classical, very cartoony, very Timverse, but also they're doing stuff that you would never actually make it into the Timverse, which is saying something.
Mm-hmm. Looks great.
And then, again, a bit of an oddity. So thankfully, they did put the actual poster in the bag when you bought the magazine. I didn't buy it new, by the way. I got this one as a back issue. But then as a centerfold, you've got all the villains that I mentioned earlier. But they're, so I guess you could take the cover off and the centerfold off and get a bigger version of the poster, but with a bunch of text on it. Or you can just have the poster in your bag. So I'm really glad they went that way and didn't make me try to put this together with tape and stuff.
Oh, they tell you exactly how to do it. They give you whole instructions on how to cut it and trim it and all this stuff, yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the next character, we've got Dian Belmont. And I think you have a little bit more familiarity with her than you do with some of these guys we're going to be talking about today.
Oh, absolutely. First off, there is a controversy here. Is it Diane? Is it Dion? Is it Dian? I've always said Dian Belmont. I know a lot of people say it should be Diane. I have always said Dian Belmont. What do you say?
Why would you drop the E? Have you ever in your life known anybody who drops the E? Diane is not, or Dian, whatever. It's not an abbreviation of any longer name. It's not like Liz and Elizabeth or something. So why would you drop the E if you didn't want a variant pronunciation? But also, I still assume Diane. I just don't know. It's just confusing, and I don't know what they were thinking when they did that to us.
Well, she lived in like the 1930s, so she's dead now. We can't ask her anymore.
Dian Belmont was created by Gardner Fox and Ogden Whitney for February 1940's Adventure Comics number 47, arriving about half a year after the Sandman. She only appeared in 18 Golden Age stories, roughly a third of Sandman's appearances, disappearing after less than 2 years. Did you read any of her Golden Age stuff, you being the JSA guy?
No, actually, Golden Age comics don't do a lot for me. I certainly respect them, but I just don't typically get into them. I have read the first appearance of her nephew, Sandy, but no, I never read, well, I maybe one story here or there, but I don't recall anything with her in the Golden. Have you read your Golden Age adventures?
Yeah, actually, I read her first appearance, and it's kind of funny. She was kind of his Catwoman to start out with. Like, she was a thief. She was driven by circumstance to become a thief. Diana Ware was introduced in The Lady in Evening Clothes, who had been raised by Slick Deacon, the best safe cracker in the business. Blackmailed to break into Wesley Dodd's house, she's discovered, but not before uncovering his Sandman identity. Dian wanted to help, both against the blackmailers and in helping to uncover the identity of her true father. The Sandman had been working with the district attorney on a case involving the murder of a close friend, and in the end, all the strands tied together. Earlier in his career, D.A. Lawrence Belmont had also rebuffed a blackmail attempt, and in retaliation, his wife and infant daughter had been killed. Except Slick Deacon couldn't abide the murder of a baby, and so he took her to raise as his own. Reunited, Dian took on her father's name, and Dodds as her lover and partner in amateur mystery solving.
That's nuts. They must have just totally, with the crisis, said, never mind.
In 1942, Dian was swapped out for her kid nephew, Sanderson Hawkins. In the 1983 retcon, Dian had designed a new purple and yellow costume for the Sandman, but when he refused it, she gave it to a journalist named Jonathan Law, who used it as the basis for his own quasi-heroic identity of the Tarantula. While Dodds was out of town, Dian investigated and was killed by some Nazis. In a truly unlikely coincidence, both the Tarantula and the Sandman, who in fact had donned her new costume design, both met while pulling Dian's body from a wrecked car, and for a time both operated in slight variations of the suit. In regards to publication history, when the Sandman came back for the second New York World's Fair Comics in 1940, Dian was on his arm. Beyond her Adventure Comics appearances, Dian Belmont was also in 3 consecutive issues of World's Finest Comics into 1942. She was in 5 issues of All-Star Comics into 1943, including number 15, where Wonder Woman has the girlfriends of the JSA dressed in their costumes for a case. Dian wore the purple and yellow Sandman suit, really putting the lie to that retcon. Still, she was only back in reprints for decades. She was in a couple of 80s issues of All-Star Squadron, but her renaissance arrived in 1993. An early title from the Vertigo Mature Readers imprint was Sandman Mystery Theater by Matt Wagner and mostly Guy Davis.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention right out of the gate here that over on the Fire and Water Podcast Network, we have a feed called the Justice Society Presents, where I do a show, but also we've just launched a brand new show called The Sandman Slept Here, where Ryan Daly, Max Romero, and Paul Kean are covering Sandman Mystery Theater, and so they get to talk about Dian Belmont every episode. So hooray!
Well, I know what ad to drop then. So did you read that Vertigo stuff? Because you're not on that show. So you're the one guy who's not on that show.
Right, I know. Like, they actually saved me a favor because I was going to have to do a whole episode on Sandman Mystery Theater. I was trying to figure out how to do it, so now I don't have to. But I absolutely was in on Sandman Mystery Theater. I had, not only did I buy the comic, I don't know that I have every issue. I think eventually I sort of drifted off maybe in the 40s, or because it only went to like 70 or something like that. I think I drifted off in the 40s somewhere, not because it wasn't good, but just, you get weird, you move on, you drop series and stuff like that. I had the poster Like they had that they released a poster that went to comic shops. It was a huge poster. I had that on my wall for years. I bought the DC Direct Action figure. I bought 2 of them of this one. So you get the Sandman Mystery Theater version of Sandman, and then you get the variant version with the JSA and the purple and the green. I was all in on this book. Absolutely, really dug the. I wasn't always a huge fan of the art, but I loved what was going on in the story and stuff.
Returning to the formula of those pre-Simon and Kirby mystery stories, Dian Belmont was restored as a socialite sleuth, Nora Charles, to Wesley Dodds' The Sandman. The Simon and Kirby material was treated as a comic book version of the Sandman within the comic, with Dian jokingly referring to herself as Sandy in reference to those tales. In darker and more grounded pulp tales, Dian kept things witty and light for 70 monthly issues, plus 2 Vertigo Winter's Edge anthology stories, a special, and an annual through 1999. So you, having read the series, she's just a socialite. She doesn't have any kind of like heavy-duty background in the Vertigo book.
Not that I can remember, no. I remember her being a socialite, but she had a adventurous streak, which attracts her to Wesley. They both love the detective work, the adventure, the helping people. I mean, she is a true partner. She's not running around in a costume, but she is a true partner for him. And it was really, I know it's mature readers, but it felt like a much more mature relationship that you could read about in these two. And I really, really dug it.
That, and she's not like the girl that, I'm going to hide from her and I've had this secret life that she can't know about and stuff. She knows, she's into it, she's helping, she will not help. It's like, I'm your partner in this, whether you like it or not. I'm going to be here to support you. We're in a relationship. You're doing this. I'm kind of into it anyway. We're doing this together now. I dug that about her.
Absolutely. Dead on, man.
At the end of that run, Belmont and Dodds informally married, but we already knew from a 4-part 1996 arc in Starman number 20 through 23 that the pair had 50 happy years together. Jack Knight visited the couple for a case, but was more tongue-tied over meeting Dian, probably his favorite Nobel-winning author. The trio worked the modern mystery together, and then were part of another mystery in a 1997 arc of The Spectre. Dian Belmont's last recent story was also set in 1997, in which he was captured by terrorists in Afghanistan. But Wesley and Dian rescued each other in the 2007 miniseries Sleep of Reason. In story, she was dying of cancer at the time, and Wesley followed her into the dark soon after her passing. She has no media representation.
I got to tell you, Frank, the art piece that you've got for us here just made my heart sing, because I thought I was the only person on the planet who remembered these ridiculously long Vertigo trading cards. They were like, you couldn't even buy 9 pocket loaders. You had to buy special, I think they were 6 pocket loaders or some crap like that. I don't remember, because these cards were so tall, because they wanted to be weird and edgy. And so I was, anyway, I was excited to see them. I was like, I didn't think anyone remembered it but me. And
it will not be the last time we play around with those cards. So since we're talking about it now, our reference for this entry comes from the 1994 SkyBox DC Comics Vertigo trading card number 68, featuring art by William Michael. I always do this. I always flip the name. Featuring art by Michael William Kaluta. Dian looks worried as she peeks behind a curtain, while behind her, well-heeled partygoers dance and mingle in an ornate ballroom, champagne chilling at a nearby table. And it is kind of interesting because since it's Vertigo, most of the elongated cards, with the exception of the Man of Steel, if I remember correctly, were Vertigo. And then they still had the regular-sized DC trading cards. So it was almost like an additional separation between the mature reader stuff and the kids stuff until they screwed it up with the Man of Steel one.
I do love this drawing. Like, honestly, until I knew Mike Kaluta did it, I assumed it was Guy Davis. Because, he was like the main sort of showrunner artist, if you will, on that series. So, and it does look kind of Guy Davis-ish. And it doesn't necessarily look like Mike Kaluta, but I guess once you say it, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see it. But it's a beautiful piece. It does feel very, roaring 20s, wild, crazy 30s, kind of fun. And it looks great, and it sets the mood for her perfectly. I mean, the only other thing that would look better, or not look better, but would make more sense would be a card of her and Wesley having sex, because they did that a lot. So, in this entry, this comprehensive 37-page document, you did mention a couple things here. I had no idea. You referenced that she had a story from 1997 in The Spectre, which I guess I never read. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to read that now. And then you said there's a 2007 miniseries called Sleep of Reason with Wesley and Dian. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so like new stories from that old era. I'm so excited to find out.
Yeah, it's weird too, because it's in that space where they still have Vertigo, but you still don't have a lot of integration between the DC and the Vertigo lines, and of course they were much more into the mystical stuff and the dark rock and roll kind of stuff. So Sandman Mystery Theater was always a little bit of an odd fit in the line, but more so in the 2000s once they got away from really any connection to the more fanciful DC type characters. So it was a bit of an outlier. And of course, it's dealing with like modern issues of terrorism and stuff, but they're doing it within the context of the 1940s. It looked like an interesting book. I only skimmed it. I didn't properly read it, but I think it's a victim of there not being an audience for that type of book in that time period. They were all getting their eyes drawn to like identity crisis and stuff like that.
The 1990s one, rather than being terrorism stuff, really was more about hate crimes. That's what the Sandman Mystery Theater was, more about hate crimes, which made it really sometimes hard to read because the stuff that was going on, it was horrible. And then the miniseries, it's a post 9/11, so you can kind of already start to play with that thread. You're talking about the Sleep of Reason is.
Sleep of Reason,
gotcha.
yeah, exactly. As far as the Spectre arc goes, one of the things that's nice about that is Roy Thomas had pretty definitively killed this character off. And John Ostrander pretty definitively said, nah, dog, and brought her back and was doing stuff with her in the Spectre run. And I think in part because I think he was taking his cues from the Vertigo series. And the Vertigo series, she appears to survive. She survives till the end of the series at least. And then through things like Secret Files, you find out that, no, they grew old together and everything else. I like that ending better anyway. I think that I understand why you fridge somebody in an ongoing superhero comic series. I much prefer that she's around and she's a part of they share a life together.
Love that so much more. Yeah.
(1938). Americans are climbing out of the Great Depression, even as another world war looms on the horizon. Murderers and madmen prey on the helpless and the innocent.
In this time, two restless souls emerge as lights in the darkness.
Insomniac Wesley Dodds, haunted by unspeakable dreams, driven to fight evil as a masked vigilante.
Socialite Dian Belmont, searching for purpose, drawn into a world of mystery and danger.
The wicked beware, for when Wesley and Dian come together, no one can escape the Sandman's dark dream.
Justice Society presents The Sandman Slept Here, covering Vertigo's Sandman Mystery Theater, one story at a time. Hosted by Ryan Daly,
Paul Ken,
and Max Romero.
Find it on the Justice Society Presents feed.
Part of the Fire and Water Podcast Network.
Dream a little dream of me.
Okay, so moving on to Alex and Roderick Burgess, and this is definitely going to be those ones where we don't have to spend a ton of time. I'll just read through here. Alex and Roderick Burgess were created by Neil Gaiman and Sam Keith for January 1989's The Sandman #1. Roderick Burgess was a wealthy occultist in the Aleister Crowley mold, but he and his Order of Ancient Mysteries were looked down upon by other such collectives. In 1916, Burgess acquired a mystical text called the Magdalene Grimoire by underhanded means, then manipulated and blackmailed a museum curator to assist him in acquiring other such magical artifacts in pursuit of power over death herself. In a cult ritual, Burgess inadvertently summoned and captured the human incarnation of Dreaming, the brother of death. When this being, also known as Morpheus, refused to speak, much less help Burgess attain immortality, he was held captive for decades. When Roderick Burgess finally died, his quote-unquote weak and queer son Alex took custody of Dream. Having felt Morpheus's power since childhood and fearing retribution from the Dream King, Alex held Morpheus until 1988. Upon escaping, Morpheus realized Alex's worst fears by literally trapping him in a waking nightmare of perpetual escalation. Aside from their appearance in Morpheus's original comic book story, the Burgesses have only turned up in a handful of other issues of different Vertigo titles, including Sandman Midnight Theater, The Dreaming, The Girl Who Would Be Death, The Sandman Presents Love Street, and the Lock and Key Sandman crossover. So you read the Sandman material?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I started when issue number 8 was on the shelves. So I did obviously go back and read number 1, certainly.
Did you get it as a floppy or a trade?
I got them as floppies, yeah.
Cool. So do you still have any of that stuff?
I have all of it still, yeah.
Nice. I think that death issue is certainly worth something.
It probably is if I were ever to part with it. But it also could have got hurt in the flood I had in '93, so I'm not really sure. Some of my comics got a little damaged, but the most important thing about this character, I think, is what I wrote was he's a TV star now.
They're all
which
TV
is
stars.
insane.
It's so funny with the Who's Who Redux, how you what is it? How do you call it? Review?
Who's Who Review? Yeah,
where you're going back and you're addressing these characters, and like everybody's got a show now. Everybody's got a multimedia representation now. It seems like.
Well, the irony though is of all these 10 characters we're going to cover today, he's the only one that's a TV star, and he's like this gross, decrepit, horrible person. and I guess Icon was on Young Justice, so maybe that counts. Okay.
Yeah. So tell me this: what did you think of that initial story arc too? Like you came in with 8. Was it just the hype that got you into the book?
Yeah, actually, it's a little bit of a longer story, but at the time I was, 93, I guess, or so, or 92, whenever issue, no, it would be 89, I guess, when number 8 was on the shelves. So anyway, I was going through my dark phase in my last year of high school, and I asked the guy at the comic shop, like, yeah, man, this is all paraphrasing, I want to read more mature comics. And so he's like, here, I'll show you 2 things. And he put Sandman number 8 in my hand, and Doom Patrol number 26, which is Brotherhood of Dada. And changed my life, at least for a few years. From that point on, all I wanted to do was read mature comics. So I immediately jumped into Sandman, Doom Patrol, blah, blah, blah. I was there in all the pre-Vertigo books. I was there when Vertigo launched, the whole thing. But I loved issue number 8 so much, and the Doll's House that came immediately after it. I did not like the first 7 issues as much, because it was more of a horror comic. Because that's what the vibe Gaiman was going for, was a horror comic. And I'm not a huge horror comic guy, and so it didn't really grab me. Other than the Sam Keith art in issue number 1, which is just freaking off the chain, right? But I didn't love the first few issues. So for me, in my mind, Sandman kind of started with issue 8. What about you? Did you read this? I assume you read this.
Oh yeah. But I started much later. I came to it in the 20s. I bought the last chapter of Season of Mists, if I remember correctly. So I went backwards a little at a time. And it took me a while to get to Preludes and Nocturnes. And I definitely read The Doll's House first, and I very much preferred that. Even the writer would say that it took him a while to figure out what the book was going to be and what he was going for. And so when I read Preludes and Nocturnes, it definitely feels, well, for starters, it feels like a guy trying to do his best Alan Moore impersonation, just right off, But also, it doesn't really hasn't figured out its way yet, and you haven't really got a way into Morpheus yet. And it's interesting. I like it. It's not bad stuff. I mean, they adapted it into a season of television, but it's not my favorite stuff. I very much preferred pretty much 8 on, just like you did.
Yep. Yeah. But hey, I mean, again, the guy's a TV star now, so you can't knock it.
Well, and this is the funny thing, too, is like you said, he's this gross, old, decrepit dude. So who do they cast in the role? Charles freaking Dance, one of the coolest old dudes ever, with Tyrion Lannister, Tywin Lannister, I don't remember which one, but he's the head of the Lannister clan, and he's still like kind of what is it, like a great granddad sex bomb, He's like, if we should all be so lucky to be Charles Dance's age and still be looking like Charles Dance does.
Right.
So very Hollywood thing there. And then Alex was played by Laurie Canaston. I'm not as familiar with that person's work. I'm Charles Dance going back to like freaking Alien 3 again, have to reference alien stuff, but like, the last action hero and all that kind of stuff. Like he was the coolest thing in The Last Action Hero with his contacts with the different icons in them and stuff.
I don't even remember that much, honestly.
So the Secret File entry is derived from the 1994 SkyBox The Sandman trading card set, number 71, with art by Brian Talbot. It features the very aged Roderick holding the Magdalene grimoire in a study, while disheveled ginger Alex pulls back a curtain from a library shelf full of old magical tomes. What do you think of the art on this one?
It's pretty good. I like the art on the back by Sam Keith better, but it's great. I mean, it really gets the point across. He looks evil, and he's gnarled, and he's clutching the book. Meanwhile, his son looks so pensive and nervous. So he did a great job capturing the spirit of the characters.
Yeah, this is one of those where the set dressing sells it for me. It's like, I think the book looks really cool and worn and all these things dangling off of it, these little like notations. I like the tassels on the curtain. I like all the books in the background. So I'm very much into the set design for the card more than the actual characters.
Looks good. And it's those long trading cards. So,
and then after that, we get Crazy About Cards by Billy Aronson, a look at one of the country's hottest hobbies, card collecting. Again, laying those pipelines is like, okay, we're already pivoting to the trading cards, but man, this was like my golden age of collecting trading cards.
Oh yeah, you kidding? This is Cosmic Teams era, man. I'm all in.
And especially with DC, like this is one of the reasons why this podcast exists is because I bought all those trading card kits. I still I went up to Mile High Comics in 2024, and I finally, after all these years from packing it out and buying singles, I finally completed my DC Cosmic card set. But I'm still a few cards short of Cosmic Teams because I also bought that one piecemeal. And learning my lesson and having income in that time period, I just started buying boxes from then on. And so that's why I'm so invested in stuff like Bloodlines, because I bought that box and I opened up all those packs and I had multiple sets. And I did that with so many DC sets. That's why I want to talk about those characters, because I made the investment. I want to return on my 30-year-old investment.
Well, let me know what cards you're missing on Cosmic Teams. I'm pretty sure I bought a box, so I probably have a bunch of spares in the garage somewhere.
I've actually got them on my phone for whenever I tumble upon. Every now and again, like I'll go to an antique mall or something and they'll have singles. And so I've got my little checklist on my phone.
I'm just saying, I can give them to you, and because there's nothing sadder than a 9-pocket loader that's only got 8 pockets full.
Yeah, and I don't have pretty much any of the chase cards from that one either.
Yeah, I'm not parting with those, sucker.
Yeah, Cheyenne. So now we're on to Spy Smasher, created by Bill Parker and C.C. Beck for February 1940's Wiz Comics #2. The same men who introduced Captain Marvel in that very same issue. In that first appearance, no origin was offered, nor secret identity explicitly stated. However, the only 3 characters are the aged Admiral Corby, his beautiful daughter Eve Corby, and her wealthy socialite fiancé Alan Armstrong. The old man is investigating saboteurs against America, and some of them try to kill him, but he's rescued by Spy Smasher. Barring gender bending, it's a straightforward case. The mastermind of a series of attacks against the US is The Mask, a guy in a suit with a handkerchief over his face. He eventually kidnaps Eve, who also has to be saved by Spy Smasher, and in a refreshing development, she recognizes that it's her fiancé straight away. Alan swears her to secrecy, then continues his vigilante crusade against the evildoers that his future father-in-law wanted sorted out, especially after the US's entry into World War II. Spy Smasher was essentially Fawcett Publications' Batman to Captain Marvel's Superman, a non-powered but highly skilled and technologically advanced Avenger. The key difference is that where the Dark Knight was from the Zorro and Shadow school, Spy Smasher was more influenced by the aviation adventure subgenre. A key element in his stories was the Gyro Sub, an advanced all-terrain craft that acted like a plane, helicopter, speedboat, or submersible as needed.
Well, I love that idea because, Captain Marvel and Superman are so similar, and to have a non-powered guy who is, out there as the crime fighter sort of thing, and using similar gimmicks, I like the idea that he is the Batman and Superman. I never thought about that. I like that.
In one of his most notable stories, after a year pursuing the Mask, Spy Smasher was himself captured and brainwashed by the Fiend. Unfortunately for the Mask, he's then the first victim of Spy Smasher's killing spree. The Spy Smasher goes on to kill scores of other people in his pursuit of smashing the United States. But Captain Marvel vows to stop him. For months, the power of Shazam is outsmarted and outmaneuvered by a Spy Smasher gone bad. Even to the point where the fallen hero smashes the device the Mask had brainwashed him with when the Big Red Cheese tries to reverse it. Luckily, the world's mightiest mortal counted hypnotism among his powers, and he finally broke the spell. Somehow exonerated, Spy Smasher is reunited with Eve and returns to defending instead of demolishing the US. At some point, he also teamed up with the popular radio aerialist Captain Midnight, who thoroughly outshined Spy Smasher throughout the encounter. I wasn't satisfied with the paltry offerings of my usual resources when it came to Spy Smasher, so most of that information came from the second volume of the Steranko History of Comics. After the war, Alan Armstrong struggled with his role. Toward the end of his time in Wiz Comics, he went plainclothes under the new title Crime Smasher and scored a one-shot in 1949, but then disappeared from the stands for decades at a time. Spy Smasher appeared in Wiz Comics through 1947's number 83, but understandably only appeared on 5 covers, as either Captain Marvel's +1 or small feature slot. He had better luck fronting his own solo quarterly title from 1941 through 43, as well as 2 issues each of the annual Gift Comics and Xmas Comics, and the single issue of All Hero Comics. Fawcett had its own version of World's Finest that highlighted their top solo heroes, including Captain Marvel, Bullet Man, Minute Man, and Mr. Scarlet. Spy Smasher appeared with the lot on most covers for America's Greatest Comics' 8-issue run. When DC Comics started licensing the Fawcett properties, Spy Smasher was reintroduced to readers in the 1974 Treasury-size reprinting of Wiz Comics #2 in a famous first edition. For his first news story, he returned alongside Fawcett's other notable superheroes in a 3-part story arc, Crisis on Earth X, in 1976's Justice League of America number 135 through 137. The Fawcett heroes were given their own Earth in the DC multiverse and were treated for the first time as a super team under the title Shazam Squadron of Justice, taken from a Golden Age grouping of Lieutenant Marvels. You were a Justice League guy. Did you not see the crossovers with Earth S or any of that kind of stuff when it happened back in the day?
I would have read them. I read a lot of Justice League comics as I bought them, and it just, I want to make it perfectly clear. I love the Justice League, but a lot of the Silver Age and Bronze Age stories just never stuck with me. I read them, they're kind of disposable in a lot of ways. So I would have read them, and I would have seen him there as part of that Shazam team, but it never really struck with me.
Aside from a wordless cameo in a 1979 Shazam story in World's Finest Comics, Spy Smasher went back in his box. By the time DC finally sealed the deal to own the Fawcett characters a decade or so later, most of the people who cared were probably out of comics already. He was reintroduced in 1995's The Power of Shazam number 8 by Jerry Ordway and Company. Alan Armstrong was quite old by that point, so he mostly just did radio interviews, talking about the old days when he fought Captain Nazi and such. In 1997, the 24th issue was a spotlight flashback to the Cold War, when Spy Smasher teamed up with Billy Batson's father to retrieve a museum piece from the clutches of Baron Blitzkrieg. He's turned up a few more times here and there over the years, most recently in 2022's The New Champion of Shazam, but he has seemingly settled into perpetual anonymity. Spy Smasher is technically in the public domain, with lots of reprint options, particularly from AC Comics. He appeared in the 2005 Top 10 The 49ers graphic novel by Alan Moore and Gene Ha, an issue of Image's Fantastic Comics in 2008, and a Captain Midnight one-shot written by Brian Augustin for Moonstone in 2013. However, DC Comics does enforce its trademarks, so they have to keep it low-key.
And I'll be honest, when I read this entry, I'm like, Spy Smasher, that's weird. I know that name, I know that costume, but I seem to remember it being a lot sexier. So I had to go back and look, and sure enough, the Spy Smasher I remember is from 2007. It was a female version of this character in the Birds of Prey book. The original Spy Smasher is named Alan Armstrong. The one in 2007 is named Katarina Armstrong. So I'm assuming, I have no recollection at this point, but I'm assuming she's some sort of descendant of his is probably what it is. She was smoking hot, and she really made an impression on me, and she was like a stone cold, unpleasant lady in the book. And so I remember her being pretty interesting.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, because I read the Gail Simone run, and I enjoyed that material. I still have it in trade paperback. I was reading it monthly, and I think that was almost like the last hurrah. I think that as Gail Simone was starting to leave the book, she brought in the Spy Smasher, and she was sort of putting together like an opposing organization to the Birds of Prey, and she was specifically adversarial toward Oracle. So it was an interesting way of going. Plus, they played into a lot of that post 9/11 political tumult, where we're going after these people that are trying to infiltrate our country and do us harm. And she was very like overzealous, like fascistic. And so that's where she butted heads. Depending on your perspective, she isn't necessarily a villain, although I do think that there was some motivation where she wanted steam and she wanted power, and it wasn't just like purely heroic actions on her part, but she still, depending on your perspective, could be the good guy in the situation. So I thought that was an interesting way to play her.
Right there with you. Absolutely. Yeah. That's how I remember it. Kind of like Amanda Waller was for a long time. She wasn't necessarily a good guy, but she was doing things on the side of the right team.
Spy Smasher was a pioneer of multimedia, appearing in the second ever movie serial inspired by comics, following his pal Captain Marvel. The 1942 12-chapter Republic serial is well regarded in its class, in fact a contender for best ever, and in 1966 was recut into a television feature as Spy Smasher Returns. He was portrayed by Kane Richmond, who also played the Shadow. The Corbies and the Mask were all included. Spy Smasher also appeared in the 2005 Justice League Unlimited episode Patriot Act, voiced by an uncredited Nathan Fillion, in a black and white sequence modeled after the serial. Did you ever see the old movie serial or anything?
No, I really was only familiar with Spy Smasher for probably just seeing images of him over the years, or if he probably showed up in Power of Shazam, I imagine. I don't know. But so no, I had no real exposure to this version of the character other than just seeing an image or two. Now, I read in your notes there that the serial, the movie serial, was that the second ever movie serial inspired by comics? Is that true?
It's as true as the research tells me it is. I wasn't there.
Wow, that's wild, man.
Yeah, but it's interesting too because the lawsuits happened fairly early on. Like DC looked at Captain Marvel and were like, and of course Captain Marvel was massively outselling DC. It was like the best-selling book on the stands at the time period. Definitely was outpacing Superman. So they targeted Captain Marvel early and hard and often, and there was a lot of back and forth in terms of the legal decisions and such. And of course, they're continuing to publish Captain Marvel that whole time period. And Captain Marvel has his own very well-regarded movie serials. But it really limited what they could do with the character in terms of merchandising and such. They didn't want, nobody wanted to license a character that had like liens and injunctions and stuff against it and everything. And so I kind of feel like maybe they pivoted to Spy Smasher in part because this character is clearly far enough away from Batman where nobody's going to be like, that guy's a clear ripoff. Like, no, it really is not a clear ripoff. And so I think that's probably part of the reason why they went to him for a movie serial was because there weren't any complications with doing that with him. And he was in the same book as Captain Marvel that was selling 2 million copies a month and such. So he had high visibility. So that was definitely, I think, Captain Marvel kind of lifting up Spy Smasher's boat a little bit. And then they're taking advantage because they didn't have the problems with Smasher that they had with Captain Marvel. Our reference for this entry is from Temporal Comics, Heroes of the Golden Age, reference guide number 4, a crowdfunded comic published in 2020. It was written by Jesse Beretta and/or Julia Lai, laid out by Darren Wiltshire, with art by Francis Chris Malgrain. We see Spy Smasher leaping downward into action, his cape flapping above and behind him. What do you think of this entry art?
Oh, I absolutely love it. I love it because you get the classic artwork there, and then you get the new rendering. Actually, okay, just as I'm not literally being mean about it. Like the new rendering, he looks a little bit like Kite Man. You know,
he does look like Kite Man, doesn't he? The symbol, I think, is what does it.
A little bit, but either way, the classic rendering looks great. I mean, he's dealing some serious consequences to folks here. Just absolutely, it looks like a boiling pot of spaghetti has fallen on some goon's head. You know, in the classic artwork section, it just looks great.
Tell me this too: where are you at on Ohatmu? Like you were an Ohatmu guy, an official handbook of the Marvel Universe guy.
I thought it was an interesting thing, especially when I was like a big fan of like X-Men trying to figure out the characters and stuff like that. But artistically, no, I've never been wild about it artistically. I mean, you get a very static shot and then you get a couple, inset panels, which are fine, I guess. But it never really did a lot for me. And also the entries tend to be like, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. Oh, and then this happened. And it just gets a little much.
Yeah, and these are clearly modeled more after Ohatmu.
No, that's probably fair. So
you're glad they exist, but it's not necessarily the format you'd prefer them in.
Well, I like Who's Who. I mean, I just want to capture a little bit of the history and the essence of the character and give me a lot of art. That's what I'm looking for. It's a pretty slick looking costume. Even today, it holds up. It looks great with the sort of aviator thing going on and the simple red triangle in the middle and the green bodysuit and the cape and everything. It just looks slick.
And it's another one, too, where, back in the 90s, they went back to giving Captain Marvel more of a uniform look, like something that a person in the military could potentially actually wear. And that worked pretty well for him. I think I have always liked Captain Marvel where he's looking like a military captain more than the full skin-tight superhero togs that are more typically seen. And Spy Smasher's the same way. The more he's a little bit looser, as we get older, we can more easily cosplay this guy versus some of these other guys that you have to have, washboard abs to pull off. But with the Aviator goggles, and that's the thing too, is it's not just Batman. He's also borrowing from the Aviator characters of the time period that were very popular. And so he's like this interesting hybrid where he's kind of an aviation guy, but also kind of a spy guy, but also kind of a detective guy and nighttime Avenger guy. He's got an interesting mix of genres to him. He's not just in any one specific lane. And I think that militaristic quality to those army fatigue greens that he's wearing plays into that.
Absolutely. Looks cool. I like him.
I think it's really interesting how this works is like you are the Justice Society guy and DC has made a point, especially in the post-crisis, which is partly part of the reason why you like this character so much, is that because you had to separate people like Superman and Batman and like the frontline superheroes from the World War II setting, that means they lean more heavily into the people that they were able to stay in that setting, like Alan Scott. So they had that continuity where we were there from the very beginning. We were there during the Depression. To some degree, we've been here since the war. And they're like the greatest legacy superhero team because they can lay claim to being the first of the superheroes on the scene, right?
Yep.
And so what's interesting to me is like, again, Captain Marvel used to outsell Superman, which means Spy Smasher was probably outselling Batman since Batman didn't sell as well as Superman books and he's in the same book as Captain Marvel. But that was a separate company and it continued to be a separate company until the mid 80s, if I remember correctly, maybe even a little later. I think it might've been going to the 90s before DC just outright bought those characters. So it's interesting because it's a sort of situation more like with like Wildstorm and such, where it's an entity that's distinct from DC, and so they can't just use them whenever they want to, or wherever they want to, and they can't be fully integrated. And again, they didn't benefit the way the Charlton characters did, where crisis happens, and so immediately in the post-crisis universe where you're reintroducing your iconic characters, alongside them you're getting Blue Beetle and Captain Atom and all those kind of guys, where the quality characters, the Fawcett characters didn't get that kind of push. And it was always like, it was a special event because you didn't get to have Captain Marvel show up just whenever they wanted to. And he had his own devoted series that would feature DC characters, but he didn't necessarily go outside his own book as much as them. But I think that really hurt a guy like Spy Smasher because obviously, the guy had his own movie serial. This guy's a kind of at least up there with a Blue Beetle, and certainly a bigger deal than a Captain Atom, as for instance. But he doesn't have any traction today because he never had a way in since DC didn't commit to buying these characters until it was too late to integrate them in a way that made them impactful. Because there aren't a bunch of stories where he's running around in the 40s or he's the guy that was around in the 50s and everybody else was like shut down by the government and stuff. There's all kinds of stuff you could have done with Spy Smasher, but because he wasn't DC's to have, he's always been one of those like stepchild to the DC universe. They're the foster characters with the exception of Captain Marvel himself, but even then compared to Superman, he's also a redheaded stepchild. These guys never really got a fair break because DC took too long to embrace them and never fully embraced them, and they've never been as relevant to the universe as they would need to be.
I'm going to say something controversial here, which is taking Captain Marvel Jr., and Mary Marvel off the table. I don't think the Fawcett characters are that interesting enough to merit a continued life. Like it was Spy Smasher with I don't know, Flashpoint, any number of DC reboots, they could have, since 2007 or whatever, they could have easily made him an integral part. It's just not that. I mean, to me, I love the Golden Age look of it. I think it's kind of kitschy and fun, but there's nothing inherently that more interesting about him than any other already existing DC character. So you look at him, you look at, frankly, all the other Fawcett characters, Bullet Man, Bullet Girl, all that kind of stuff, they're not as compelling as the stable of characters DC already had control of. So I see why they didn't do a lot with them.
You have duplications. Like, why would you go with Spy Smasher to be your 1940s Batman when you have so many other characters that would fit that role? Why not pump up WildC.A.T.? What does Spy Smasher bring to the table that WildC.A.T. doesn't bring, so for instance? So
similarly, are you going to keep sticking with Solomon Grundy, or are you going to make IBAC a big deal? Mm-hmm. You're not going to make IBAC a big deal.
Yeah. It's a fair point. They missed the crisis opportunity, and so most of this stuff happens in Power of Shazam. Mm-hmm. I would see, like, he's on one of the Steranko covers for Steranko History of Comics, but he's one of those guys where it's like, hey, who's that guy in the green? Unless you read the book, you don't know who this guy's supposed to be. And you got those Fawcett Collectors of America that are really, really devoted to that line. But like you said, unless you're a Fawcett-specific person, and I don't know how many of those guys are still floating around. I don't know how many of those guys are even really around in the 90s. And again, it's so corralled. They're bringing these characters back in one DC title, not really that big of a title too. It's like the Jerry Ordway graphic novel came on pretty strong, but the series that followed came a little too late. It was going to have art by Mike Parobeck with inks by Jerry Ordway, which would have been astonishing. And the promotional art for it was incredible. You instead get Peter Krause, who I don't think is necessarily the person that you put on a Captain Marvel book. So I think it was almost self-sabotaging from the gate, is he's not the guy that you get for that kind of book. There's just nothing there to give this guy any traction. So however big of a deal he might have been in the 40s, it was way too far gone before they tried to do it at DC. And like you said, what is he really bringing to the table? Like if you go back to the 1970s story, the crisis that involved the Earth-S, it really is the Captain Marvel family and those other guys. And they don't even bother to bring the other guys into the second chapter, I think, the third chapter. So it's the same kind of situation as like, what are these guys bringing to the table? So as much as I would like to like Spy Smasher, and don't even get me started on the whole Crime Smasher thing that didn't really work out, you need him to have more of an impact than be the guy in the Captain Marvel circles. Like Captain Marvel struggles for relevancy.
Good point. Yeah.
It is I, Darkseid. I command you to listen to the Who's Who podcast. Uncover the powers and weaknesses of the Super Friends so that I may destroy them.
Aquaman and Superman, Animal Man and Plastic Man, Firestorm and Nuclear Man, Batman and Hawkman, 2D Man and Hour Man.
Who are all these people, man?
They're all part of the DC Who's Who. Ultra Boy and Booster Gold, Lightning Lass and Hippolyta, Phantom Stranger, Etrick and Arisia and Woozy Winks.
Hey.
What?
about that one guy?
What guy?
Mr. Pretzel, Mr. Lipstick, Mr. Mitzelfuzzle?
Mr. Mitzi's Pitlick?
Yeah, him.
He's also part of the DC Who's Who.
Who's Who, the definitive podcast of the DC Universe.
Available monthly at fireandwaterpodcast.com and on iTunes and Stitcher.
Then from there we get the secret origin of Batman. And let me read over this one right quick. This is by Kelley, Puckett, Mike Parobeck, Rick Burchett, and company. GCD writes, Bruce Wayne recalls the death of his parents and devoting his life to training his mind and body. Then inspired by a bat that crashed through his window, he becomes the Batman.
Yeah, and again, Parobeck, so it's gorgeous, right? And they've already got the Timverse Batman animated series model sheets going, so it looks very on model. Bruce just looks like a badass. Honestly, he looks so cool. Great use of the panels, great movement, dynamic stuff going on, and it ends with a great shot of Batman on a rooftop on a gargoyle, which is exactly what you want, right? So it's a total win.
That and I Shall Become a Bat, like direct quote from the original Golden Age comics.
Yeah, I don't know if the whole thing's not the quote, but yes, I Shall Become a Bat is absolutely from that Batman origin that was done. It wasn't the first issue, but whenever they finally told Batman's origin, I used to have it on a T-shirt I got in the 90s, by the way. That whole page, the one-pager Batman origin from like the 50s. I've had that forever. Anyway, it looks great. Absolutely stunning.
And then the story is, I think, much more classical. Like part of what I loved about the first story was how it's so of that late 80s, early 90s time, like really getting you up to date with the Byrne Man of Steel version of Superman. With this Batman, it's very much more classical. It's fairly Bronze Age, but beyond that, like any time over the last half century, this is Batman's origin. It's simplified. They add stuff to this, but all the basic stuff is here. And I really love how Kelley Puckett is somebody who I wish had done more in comics. Like he did some stuff, but like he started the run of Green Arrow with Connor Hawke, and I was really enjoying his work on that as a for instance. I like how spare he can be, how he lets the artwork do most of the lifting and just like he's there to create the thread so that you know what's going on in the artwork, but he really lets the visuals tell the story. And I enjoyed that quality, especially here, because I really don't need you to belabor telling me, oh no, he specifically stuttered under Ra's al Ghul in Mongolia in this time period. It's like, I don't need that level of detail. I'm just perfectly happy to see the iconic, almost like that Grant Morrison thing for All-Star Superman, where it's just like, here's the bullet points, here's everything you need to know about Batman, go forward and learn more, Yeah,
I mean, this other than the Soviet flag, other than that, this could literally be any time period, the 50s to the 2020. It would work. Any of it would work.
I missed that. But then again, it still can kind of work because maybe they had that. I don't know. I'm no price good. I'm not giving that. But nice catch. Okay, so moving on, we've got Soldier. In the original Superman and Batman magazine, this slot went to the hero file for Wonder Woman. But we're not doing the post-crisis version of the Amazing Amazon just yet. Instead, we'll offer a look at a character who is sort of the Wildstorm Universe's Steve Trevor, but more accurately is the beta version of Grifter. This entry was taken from 1994's WildC.A.T.s sourcebook number 2. 4 different people were credited with writing the various entries, but the art is definitely by Dan Norton and Chuck Gibson, with colors credited to another 10 entities. It shows a very stocky and buzzcut soldier wearing a wife beater with dog tags, green fatigues, and combat boots. He's smoking a stogie, holding a high-tech machine gun, looking blissful in the midst of a battlefield covered by smoke, explosive craters, and barbed wire. Now, this is a fairly small entry, although it's kind of hard to read because they did that thing where you've still got the artwork in the background. Do you think you can read this guy's story?
You want me to read it aloud for you? Sure. The first thing I want to point out, though, is the top of the ad or the top of the page where it says Soldier. I was convinced he was actually OG Soldier, like original gangsta Soldier, because the smoke from his cigar looks like OG. So I kept looking for where the other OG was. So that's just my confusion.
Like, smoke doesn't really do that. So it's like, why would you even make that choice? It's so odd.
Oh, there's so many things to talk about with this artwork. Oh my gosh. Okay, here we go. Soldier is very strong for a human and can withstand surprising amounts of damage. He is an excellent but undisciplined brawler who has always declined formal combat training. Soldier is skilled in the use of firearms, knives, and explosives. I'm reading it this way to sound a little bit military and also to show you how poorly it's written. History. Soldier served in the U.S. Army during World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, never rising past the rank of sergeant because leading men and following orders weren't what he joined the Army for. Now in his late 60s, Soldier is like a battleship with a peeling coat of paint and a little rust. Even past his prime, he's still one of the greatest fighting machines ever made. Back in the early 1950s, Zealot offered to train Soldier in the ways of the Coda, but he refused, partly because he wasn't into training and discipline, and partly because it felt like too much of a commitment. Soldier loved Zealot then and still loves her, but they split up years ago. Soldier recently came out of retirement when Zealot's baby sister, Savant, called him in to help Zealot in a battle against Tapestry. With Tapestry defeated, he'll probably return to the tour of America's grimiest bars. Yeah, I'm not impressed, man.
As far as I know, no one has ever cared enough to take the credit for creating Soldier, but it was presumably Jim Lee and or Brandon Choi. However, when he debuted in the April 1994 cover-dated WildC.A.T.s number 10, it was in a backup feature, Soldier Story, by H.K. Proger and Ryan Benjamin. In Soldier Story, our then unnamed hero was serving in the Korean War in October 1950. The Korean People's Army were serving as an advanced force to pin down the U.S., while China's People's Liberation Army would outflank and annihilate the Americans. Soldier's superior officer was suicidal, fearing torture, and tried to dive on a grenade to make an early exit. Soldier just threw it back at the enemy, and then backhanded the lieutenant over his lack of bravado. Soldier led from behind cover, rushed the distance to the commie rats, while miraculously evading most of the fire. He then killed the lot of Koreans, but still had to contend with the Chinese. Gut shot, Soldier planned to die with the explosives he'd planted to cut off the Chinese's entry route. But as he passed out, he saw a vision of an angel. At least that's what he called the white-haired warrior woman from the planet Cherubim. You may better remember her as Zealot, or maybe not since we haven't actually discussed her yet. Zealot felt that Soldier was too great a, soldier to die like this. And after he received medical attention, to be left in a stockade for striking an officer. Contradicting most of his biography, Soldier actually did receive Coda training from Zealot, but just wasn't able to graduate from the training. But he did become Zealot's partner in combat and passion for a period of time, long enough to come to think of Savant as his own little sister. In the 1950s, Zealot had dyed her hair black and operated in the alias Lucy Blaze. Soldier and Lucy went to war against the Quiet Men, a sect of invisible assassins descended from another of Zealot's failed attempts to give men training in Coda. With further patronage by Hellspawn, the threat of the Quiet Men was believed quashed around the 1970s. In modern times, Savant recruited Soldier and Mr. Majestic to help save Zealot when she fell under the malevolent sway of the sorceress Tapestry, and it seems Soldier had prior encounters with the villain team called the Troika. Soldier also covered for Zealot when she tried to take a sabbatical, but ended up teaming up with Grifter to locate her when the Quiet Men resurfaced. At one point, Soldier is referred to as a general, again contradicting the entry text. Soldier has appeared in all of 9 comic books. The short story Prelude is part of a 4-issue WildC.A.T.s arc, a single-page reprise a few issues later, and a 3-issue arc of the second Grifter series in 1997. He has not crossed over into outside media.
His history is, like, I've read a lot more of what you wrote here. You gave us quite a bit of history of this character, and it's clearly written by, like, some guy who grew up watching G.I. Joe and bad, like, army movies or whatever, and has no understanding of the actual military chain of command or respect for commanding officers. Because it talks about, like, what a D-bag he is to his commanding officers and all this stuff, and yet he keeps being lauded as a hero. I mean, it's awful. This is not good.
Yeah, and what kills me too is I have to check the timeline on this. I don't know if the entry came out before or after the character had stories in comic books. Like, it might be one of those things where they came up with the character first, gave you an entry to introduce the character, and then actually did a story later on. But the actual stories contradict this entry.
Well, that was like copyright camping is what it was, really. Like, you put a character out there just for the purpose of copyrighting the name so you could eventually write a story about it. They were doing a ton of that in the 90s.
Yeah, but Soldier, man, you don't get more generic than that. I know. There's no way you're going to do anything with that.
I'm so glad you let me talk about the WildC.A.T.s. Oh, joy. Thank you.
Well, okay, and I wanted to ask you about that. Did you read any Image stuff?
Yeah, I bought number 1 of every series. I actually stuck with Spawn for like a year or so. I feel like I stuck with another one or two. It's all vague, but I bought every number 1 for the first year or two, sure. None of it was written worth a damn, so it didn't really stick with me. I know people love Savage Dragon. I get it. I know people love Shadowhawk. I get it. That's cool. It just wasn't for me, man.
People love Shadowhawk?
They do. They really did.
Wow.
They really did.
I did not know that. Did you ever circle back to Wildstorm down the line?
No, I know WildC.A.T.s got a lot. I know, like I think Alan Moore wrote some or something. Like, a lot of different people came on, but it just no interest. Like every time I see, even after the New 52, when they tried to integrate the Wildstorm characters, like my eyes start glazing over when I read the word Demonite. I'm like, oh, I'm done. I'm out.
I think Jim Lee was the first person to realize. I mean, you could argue Todd McFarlane, but Todd McFarlane having an writer come in and do one comic book at a time, like, okay, you do one issue of Spawn, 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 and then it goes back to being me again. Where Jim Lee was the first guy to realize, oh, we actually need writers to do this. I can't just get my buddy who I was running D&D campaigns with to write all my comic books. I need actual writers. And so he got people to do actual runs. And this was the start of that, because this guy appeared in comic books that were written by Chris Claremont during the very brief period of time that he wrote for Image comic books.
Interesting. Okay.
But again, you've got Jim Lee as a co-creator. You got Chris Claremont. Stephen Grant wrote some of this guy's stories. Even James Robinson wrote him a little bit. You had art by Travis Charest on this guy. None of them could elevate Soldier past this generic name and NPC vibe.
It's a good way to put it.
So what about the artwork, though? You were saying you wanted to discuss this artwork.
Oh, simply that 1994 called, and it wants its Jim Lee ripoff artist back.
This is rough.
This is peak Image past the first wave. Like we all remember, it launches with all the big artists, right? And then they start bringing in the second stringers, and then they bring in the third stringers, and it's like that's where you get like Team Youngblood type art or whatever, stuff like, woo, this is rough, and this is definitely in that rough phase.
And it's not like this is the worst thing ever. It's just that it's so over-rendered and the proportions are so wonky. Like, is this guy supposed to be short because he looks like he's a little squat guy, but I know that he's not. And of course, he's got the big, ridiculous gun. So it's like, okay, I guess this is modern times, but he sure doesn't look like a 60-year-old. It's all right. It's all right to look at. But it's like you said, it's extremely 90s.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I've seen Extreme Justice looked worse than this, so don't get me wrong. I mean, there's worse crap out there, but it just looks rough.
Again, they had the first string of the third string,
Yeah.
So where DC was getting the guys that weren't good enough to be third stringers at Image.
Can we stop talking about Soldier and move on? Because the next character is actually interesting.
Go for it.
So it's the Grim Reaper. First of all, he looks badass. All right, he's got this giant sort of midnight blue cloak, and then he's wearing a cowl underneath there, and he's got a white outfit, or a white shirt, and the blue pants, and the giant belt buckle with the skulls on it, and he's carrying a sword, and he just looks cool.
Like Soldier, there's not a lot of there for Grim Reaper. Voted most likely to be constantly confused with MLJ's Hangman by me. Every time I went to research not Hangman, I kept looking up Hangman and aborting. Maybe because very few of my reference sources acknowledge the Grim Reaper. Jeff Rovin's Encyclopedia of Superheroes offers the barest of entries, and Don Markstein skipped him altogether. Both his entry and Comic Vine offer incorrect information about where he first appeared. There's a short story in The Fighting Yank, number 7, sandwiched between a bunch of Fighting Yank short stories with a February 1944 cover date. In that appearance, the Grim Reaper's costume was almost all white without any kind of highlights, so it just looked like somebody forgot to color him. Sometimes he's in almost all black, but usually he's in shades of purple with a long sleeve white shirt to break it up. That's how he looked on the Alex Schomburg cover to Wonder Comics number 1, this version published by Pines, with a May 1944 cover date. His creation is credited to writer-editor Richard E. Hughes, and most of the strips were drawn by Al Kamey, better known for his work on Airboy. Bill Norris was an American studying in France when the Nazis began their march on Paris. While fellow students at the Sorbonne fled ahead of the occupation, Norris refused to be moved or to stand by as Nazis hassled the locals. This explicitly landed him in a concentration camp, where Norris again stood up for a persecuted elder and was punished for it. This time, though, the old man was the leader of the French underground, and his dying wish was for Norris to escape and help smuggle an important military figure out of the country. So he did, with the help of his new contacts in the underground, who also procured for him a costume that would strike terror in the hearts of Nazis. After his initial success, the Grim Reaper made a habit of staying behind enemy lines to outright execute Nazis, often rallying resistors to assist him, at least for a few months, because the Germans surrendered in May of 1945, and Wonder Comics was a quarterly. Pretty swiftly, the Grim Reaper's whole shtick was thrown out, and he was stuck non-lethally roughing up bank robbers and con men. He lost the cover slot with Wonder Comics number 9, and was out of comics entirely after the 17th issue in 1948. Cold comfort, but the cheesecake science fantasy heroine that replaced him, Tara, didn't survive the year.
And his history, man, it goes on and on and on. This thing was really fascinating. I got to tell you, this printed piece, this 3-page printed piece that you're going to share with everyone, it might be my favorite character yet of all the different entries that we've talked about in this episode.
However, the more heroic Grim Reaper lives on in other publishers, like the one responsible for this secret file. This entry was derived from the crowd-funded, print-on-demand publisher that revived the Pines character under the banner of one of its other publishing names. Ned Pines was like Martin Goodman in that his comics were published under multiple names, for probably non-classy reasons. The Standard Comics Encyclopedia has a 2017 copyright date and is a prestige format, square-bound edition. It sadly does not offer any creative credits on the new material, like the entry art for Grim Reaper, which is what you described, and yeah, he looks super cool. I think it looks a lot like Tom Lyle. It reminds me very much of Tom Lyle's style, and I think this character immediately is like, wow, this guy looks cool, I want to know more about him. It features a revised, Ultimates-type modern take on the basics of the original. He now has a proper cowl with a skin-tight half mask underneath, an elliptical clasp on his cape, gray shirt, purple gloves, military-style cargo pants, and lace-up combat boots. He has a gold skull and bones belt buckle with a holstered pistol, brandishing a large dagger in his right hand. At the revived Standard Comics, he's a crime-fighting partner to their version of Black Orchid, because that's a name that's also in the public domain, and serves on their premier super team, the Sentinels. But that's specific to this print-on-demand line, which I've dabbled with, obviously. But actually, the core combo character from the Golden Age is pretty cool looking, too.
All of it looks fantastic. I mean, yeah, the Golden Age one's a little more Golden Age. He's got, the giant skull and crossbones on his the Jolly Roger as a cape, basically. Would have given the Black Terror a run for his money, I suppose. But, and this is the guy that fights Hitler, right?
Yeah, he's got Yodfers and such. Yeah, he's very of his time.
I love this. Now, sadly, the Jeff Roven book barely even mentions him. I mean, he just gets this little tiny thing. So I am confused about something. So this entry goes on, and it does sort of the Ohatmu thing where it says he had this adventure, and he has this adventure, and has this adventure, this adventure. Whereas, the Jeff Roven book says he only had 17 appearances. Here, there's see Grim Reaper issue number 70 and things like that. So are they making up stories, or are these all stuff they did themselves, or what?
It's a terrible lie. It's all fake. I mean,
really?
the Sentinel series starts at issue 500 and something. They just randomly started at a point, and they try to backfill the story, but they're pretending like they've been in print this entire time, and so it starts at legacy numbering for a series that never existed.
That's actually fascinating. Okay, so maybe I liked a bunch of history that never happened then, because I just found the character to be really interesting.
No, I do think the character is still really interesting from the Golden Age perspective, because this is a guy who, another one Marvel has, the Destroyer. He's a guy who actually works behind enemy lines. He's basically, again, he's a Batman type. He's in occupied territory. Usually his MO is that he finds whoever he can that would be willing to work with him to help him to overthrow some portion of the Fuhrer's empire. And he's just a really hardcore vigilante type dude, specifically with a add-on for fascists and most specifically for Nazis. What's not to like there? This dude just seems really cool. And I like that even in the Golden Age, his costume, besides the cape, the costume's fairly realistic. Again, he's got the Yodfurs, he's got hiking boots, he's got essentially a gray or white long sleeve shirt, and he's got a gun belt, and his dagger goes on that. So really the only thing he's wearing is sort of a hood to cover himself up with so he can move around in the dark and not get spotted by, goose steppers and such. So he's sort of practical, and he's really cool, and it's a neat idea. I think the problem is he comes along too late. But he comes in right at the end of the war. So there's a matter of a few issues into the series, the war ends. And his whole premise is fighting the Nazis on their own turf. So then they have to go, okay, we'll go back to the United States and do that with gangsters. And it's just not the same thing. I'm
totally going off on a tangent here. I'm obsessed with his name, Bill Norris, because all that keeps going through my head is that when they picked this name, perhaps that was a nod to Golden Age creators. Because Paul Norris helped co-create Aquaman and other characters, right? And then you've got Bill Finger who helped create Batman, and it just felt like I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching here, but it's an unusual name.
It's not a Roy Thomas thing. It's this guy was around in 1944. So if they're borrowing the name is from a buddy of theirs that they worked with, not some creator that they revered from the deep past.
Oh, exactly. No, because the Jeff Roven thing agrees he had the name even as far back as then. So yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I don't know, but I love the behind the enemy lines kind of thing, America Commando did for a while there, fighting the bad guys on their own turf, and all the different adventures you went through. I found this one very interesting.
And do you know about his connection to DC Comics, though?
I do not.
Okay. The Grim Reaper enters the DC universe in 2001's Tom Strong number 12. Within Alan Moore's ABC Comics, public domain heroes served in place of Earth 2, where the modern ABC heroes could cross the multiverse for adventures with their Golden Age counterparts. Alongside most of his contemporaries, Grim Reaper was held in temporal stasis by an alien for about 20 years. So basically what happened is that Alan Moore wanted to do the Crisis on Infinite or Crisis on Multiple Earths. He wanted to do the thing that Gardner Fox did in JLA around issue 20 or so, where, okay, here's Tom Strong, and then there's this guy named Tom Strange, who's the Tom Strong of the Golden Age, and we were going to team up and save the heroes from this time period that are being held by aliens. And then he'd have access to those characters. So Grim Reaper was, again, one of their heroes. He wasn't the main one. Black Terror was the main one because he was their Batman, essentially, along with Doc Strange, who was, of course, I think they were called like Doc Strong in this one, where Tom Strong versus Doc Strong. They're from two different Earths, essentially. And so Alan Moore just wanted to write one of those type of stories, and he borrowed these neater characters to do that with. And that's how they get brought in, because, of course, later on, ABC gets absorbed into DC proper, and you've got the Terrifics and involving those characters. So they're from the ABC Earth, borrowing from a Golden Age public domain Earth. They eventually got absorbed into the main DC universe.
Well, there you go. That makes sense. Now, Tom, I feel so bad. This is like the second or third time I've said on a podcast with you, I've got Tom Strong sitting on my to-read shelf, and I just haven't got around to it.
Yeah, it's pretty fun stuff. And God, that Chris Burrows artwork is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if they'd gotten Chris Burrows to do a JSA thing? Like, maybe he did the second year of JSA in the 90s?
Oh, that would have been amazing.
Yeah.
So look at Grim Reaper's face. You know who this artwork actually looks like to me on the entry, the fake entry thing? Derek Robertson.
Okay, I can see that.
Not in his massive superhero phase, but kind of as he's getting into the boys sort of style. That's kind of what I'm seeing here.
They got that rich Perez indented inks that Robertson was doing in that time period. So I can see that too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I like this dude. This dude is cool.
Yeah, I like this guy a lot.
Yeah. Now, one problem with the ABC character that I have to address, he's not around anymore. He won't be popping up in any Terrifics. So what happened is, while the heroes were held in stasis by the aliens on that Earth, the gangsters basically took over, and it was a crime-riddled world. And so when Grim Reaper comes back, he sort of shrugs and says, okay, well, I guess I'll do crime then. He was hired to go after the Black Terror, the guy said was sort of a Batman type, and Black Terror ends up killing him in 2003's Terra Obscura #1. That version went bye-bye. The DC version went bye-bye as a result. But this guy's still out there, and anybody can do a Grim Reaper comic book. But I kind of like the way these standard comics guys are doing it right now.
Yeah, I kind of dig it.
Yeah. Okay, so anything else on this dude?
No, other than I love him, and I think he's my favorite character that we're going to cover.
Yeah, and it's cool, too, because they have artwork from those new books. So it's a little bit more, it feels a little bit more like the Roven book, but more heavily illustrated as opposed to being just the Ohatmu qualities of the Temporal Comics ones.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
But getting back to those, we're going to talk about Bullet Man. Bullet Man was created for May 1940's Nickel Comics #1, for which he was the cover star by Fawcett Publications' Bill Parker and John Small. It was an experimental format with a half-price comic published with half the standard pages on a bi-weekly schedule. So it was twice the work for the same amount of money as a normal comic, and died after 8 issues. Bullet Man was moved to the more standard Master Comics a couple of months later with #7, then rotated on covers with Minuteman for a year, until the Marvel family kicked them both back to interiors only. Shortly thereafter, Captain Marvel Jr. dominated the book. Pat Barr was the latest in a long legacy of beat cops, but he was declared too honest for this city by the crooks who gunned him down in a drive-by. On his deathbed, Barr made his twin son, Jim, vow to carry on the cop family tradition. Jim Barr devoted his young life to the study of police science, specifically ballistics, earning the derisive nickname Bullet Barr. The kid was so obsessive, in fact, that he neglected his physique, Steve rogering himself to failure at the police entry exam. However, his mind was still valued by the authorities, as he was accepted into the police research laboratory, essentially doing a precursor of CSI forensics. While successful in this type of law enforcement, it wasn't enough for Jim Barr. He saw crime as a literal disease caused by, quote, toxins, and concocted a germ destroyer that he felt could only be tested on himself. At first, the crime cure did nothing, but overnight, he Captain America'd himself into a taller, well-muscled Adonis. And he did so half a year before Cap debuted. Recognizing that the societal risk of his creation outweighed the benefits, Barr destroyed all evidence of the concoction. However, it had augmented his mind as it had his body. So Barr created a gravity helmet that allowed him to fly, and with his incredible strength and 9 vulnerability, became the heroic Bullet Man. Barr often worked with Police Lieutenant Kent and developed a relationship with his daughter, Susan. When she discovered Jim's extrajudicial activities about a year into his career, it was decided that she would join him in juicing and defying gravity as Bullet Girl. For a few months in 1942 through 43, they even gave their pet pooch Slug a flying collar so that he could join them as Bullet Dog, and Todd Drake was Bullet Boy for a couple of issues in 1944. Bullet Man was an early success for Fawcett, arriving just 3 months after Captain Marvel and preceding Cap Jr. and Mary Marvel. Despite the short life of Nickel Comics, Bullet Man almost immediately moved into a 99-issue run on Master Comics. That lasted through 1949. In the meantime, Bullet Man had 16 irregularly published issues of an eponymous title from 1941 through 46. Bullet Man and Bullet Girl were both part of a one-off 1943 team called the Crime Crusaders Club, which also included Minuteman and Captain Marvel Jr. Because most of the Fawcett stories and characters went into the public domain, many small publishers have reprinted them. However, when AC Comics got around to reprinting Master Comics number 41, they redrew Jr. as Mr. Scarlet to evade any DC ire. All of those characters were also in the Fawcett revival at DC in the 1976 Crisis on Earth-esque JLA arc, and most were members of the so-called Squadron of Justice team invented for that story. Since they're pretty much a package deal, Bullet Man appeared in most of all the same comics from varied publishers as Spy Smasher. Add to the copy-paste and issue each of Charlton Bullseye, FemForce, Alter Ego, and Savage Dragon. At DC, Bullet Man's origin was briefly referenced in 1978's World's Finest Comics number 253 by E. Nelson Bridwell and Don Newton, with a longer version including Bullet Girl a couple of issues later, as they teamed up with the Marvel family against the sorceress Dream Dancer. The 80s were not kind to the Fawcett characters, as DC only maintained their Shazam license, so they were all left out of Crisis on Infinite Earths, settling for a single issue of Infinite Crisis 20 years later. Bullet Man did not make it into both Robinson and Smith's 1994 The Golden Age and Ross and Wade's 1996 Kingdom Come. Bullet Man joined the post-crisis continuity in 1995's The Power of Shazam number 8 by Ordway, Krause, Swan, and Manley, going on to appear in 10 total issues of that title, plus 2 issues of Starman as part of a crossover. Since the history books are written by the victors, Bullet Man's powers now came from a variation on Iron Man's Miraclo, and his flight from Hawkman's Nth Metal. Also during World War II, Bullet Man and Starman had a rare team-up on a secret mission involving an invader from Venus, who was eventually captured with the help of Green Lantern Abin Sur. In modern times, the mystic Ibis called upon Bullet Man to join the Marvel family against the demoness Blaze. In the interim, Jim Barr had branded his Bullet Man identity to become quite rich, and he and Susan had conceived a now-adult daughter. Deanna Barr was a military test pilot on an experimental personal aircraft codenamed Windshear, while also taking part in a sting operation for Sarge Steele of the Department of Metahuman Affairs. Unaware of the details, Jim Barr asked Captain Marvel to help out, not realizing that Billy and Dian would briefly become romantically involved. Jim had Billy kidnapped as part of an intervention on the matter, so Billy was weirdly cool about it when Barr was accused of treason, and Marvel had to get into a fight with the modern Starman to help prove his innocence. Bullet Man returned the favor by helping out during some key story arcs, including defending Fawcett City in the Marvel's absence. Very briefly taking up the gear of her late mother, the former Bullet Girl, Deanna Barr joined her father in battle with Chain Lightning, but continued to use the name Windshear. The DC version of Bullet Man has yet to appear in the new century, but the Earth-S version turned up in 2015's Convergence Shazam microseries by Jeff Parker and Doc Shaner. They battled the Gaslight alternate DC Earth in a bright spot for that non-event. In the core continuity, Bullet Man and Bullet Girl have been succeeded by a new character, Bulleteer. So, do you know anything about old Bullet Man?
I know that he's a Fawcett character, and he very specifically falls into my example earlier of just not that interesting. I mean, yeah, I remember seeing him, here and there in comics in the 70s. I remember seeing him involved with Captain Marvel, Power Shazam stuff. Obviously saw him in various places, but no, he never really... There was never a comic I remember going, oh yeah, that's a Bullet Man story. Nothing like that at all. I remember Bullet Woman or Bullet Girl, whatever, depending on who was drawing it, might be like, okay, wait, I'll pay attention for a moment. But my more exposure is sort of the legacy version, I guess, or whatever made it easier for DC to publish, the Bulleteer, who's sort of a female version of Bullet Girl, who's like all silver. Like maybe she's made of metal or something. I knew she was around for a little bit. I specifically remember her in the comic series called 52, where Firestorm put together a Justice League that lasted like half an issue. Had Firehawk, Firestorm, Ambush Bug, the Bulleteer, and Super Chief they're obviously doomed to failure immediately. But anyway, that's kind of really my main exposure to these versions of characters.
Like Spy Smasher, they brought this character back in the Jerry Ordway Power of Shazam series. And they made him the centerpiece of a crossover between that book and Starman. And you were reading Starman, weren't you?
Oh, I would have read that then. Okay.
Okay. So, yeah, they were doing the crossover, and basically they seeded Bullet Man into the Power Shazam series by having him sort of be a mentor figure to Billy Batson. And his daughter had become a new character called Windshear, and she was interested in dating Captain Marvel without knowing that Captain Marvel was also Billy Batson. And then the dad knows that Billy Batson is a kid, but he can't tell his daughter that she's dating a kid or trying to date a kid. And so he's opposed to it. But then the kid's like, well, this is kind of my first girlfriend. And I am like 11-ish. So it's not like it's completely outside of my area of interest. And so there's this clash between these generations and who knows what and who's working under false pretenses and such. And then in the midst of that, there's this thing that gets unearthed where it makes it look like Bullet Man was a traitor to the United States. And so they're going after him for treason. And that sets up a conflict between Captain Marvel and Starman. And they did that over, I think, 2 issues each of the Starman series and the Power of Shazam series.
Okay. All right. Well, would have picked it up. Doesn't ring a bell. Yeah. Let me ask you. Well, and I'm lumping Bullet Man and Bullet Girl together. Do these characters interest you?
They interest me for historical value, and like you buy a bunch of comic book resources, reference books like the Jeff Robin book, and inevitably you're going to see images of Bullet Man and Bullet Girl, and some of those covers are really nice looking and such, especially like Macro Boy stuff and everything else. But let's be honest, the classic version of this guy looks like a total dork. It's just there's no getting around. There's too many colors going here. Not enough of those colors are bullets. He does sort of look like a Conehead from Saturday Night Live. There's a lot of barriers between this guy being something cool, and I think they probably had the right idea with Bulleteer, where they make it work into a little bit more of a cheesecake character, lean more into, hey, there was a female character in this team that was one of the early superheroines, and let's honor that to some degree. Yeah, I think that they were right to move past this particular character.
Yep.
And I don't know about you, one problem I always had with this character is I always got confused because I didn't have a lot of Marvel, DC comics in the 70s, but I had Marvel stuff. And Marvel stuff had a bunch of these ads for this doll called G.I. Joe. And do you remember that comic strip from the G.I. Joe when they were trying to position them into the super adventure team in the late 70s?
No.
Okay. You don't remember that comic strip? Wow. Okay. So, the G.I. Joes were introduced in 1964, and that was a pretty good time for G.I. Joe to come out, but then the Vietnam War escalates, and the sentiment against wartime and military gets worse and worse. So by the 70s, it's really not cool to be the military guys. So that's when they started in the adventure team, where they were doing more like, not so much military stuff, but sort of like first responders and things like that. And then they get more and more into the superhero stuff, like with the Kung Fu Grip in 1974, right? Well, then this other company comes around called D.E.O, and they have extraordinary success with licensed properties and superheroes. And so G.I. Joe is trying to bite into their action. So first they come up with Atomic Man in 75, who's basically the $6 million man, but for G.I. Joe. And then going into 76, you've got the Super Adventure Team, and they created a whole thing where instead of having Cobra, they're fighting these guys called the Intruders, who are these big burly like cavemen from coming from the past to the future and all this kind of nutty stuff. And so they introduced Bullet Man in the midst of that. It's an action figure. You can buy that Bullet Man action figure, but he looks a lot more like Captain Atom, where he has not just the silver helmet, but it goes into his neck, and then he also has silver arms, and he still has short shorts, kind of more like Bullet Girls actually, but just like it's mostly a silver and red color scheme, and so it just works better. And so I never understood how that Bullet Man related to this Bullet Man. And what it was is that Hasbro was looking at a way of continuing G.I. Joe in the 70s by biting the Mego action and coming up with their own superheroes. And they basically stole Bullet Man from Fawcett since they weren't doing anything with it anyway. And most of that stuff was in the public domain. So my Bullet Man was always the dude in that one comic strip that was like somewhat equivalent to like the Little Debbie Snack Cakes comics, where it's all in this one page. It's all intended to sell you something. They looked like a comic book. They read like a comic book. They had Marvel style artwork. And to me, those were just as legitimate as anything else I was reading in that time period.
Yeah, I'm looking right now at the Bullet Man action figure. That is some serious something. Wow. And I can see sort of, the echoes of the comic book character, but still distinctly different enough. Yeah. The silver arms are something special, man.
Yeah, legally distinct. In case anything comes after them, it's legally distinct. But the influence is clearly there. And that version also has his quirks where it's like, okay, I don't know how easily you'd update that dude, but I still think he looks better than the Golden Age character.
Yeah, I guess. You know what? The artwork for that version of Bullet Man does, but the actual figure, not so much. Right.
It's very 70s Marvel. I wouldn't be at all surprised if they produced it for that company.
Yeah.
One other interesting thing, that version of Bullet Man turned up a few years back in a Snake Eyes miniseries that was drawn by Rob Liefeld.
Oh, goodness.
That was wild.
I'm so sorry I missed that.
Yo, I'm sure. I can tell the despair in your voice.
Mm-hmm.
So our reference for this entry is again from Heroes of the Golden Age #4 by Beretta, Andor Lai, Wiltshire, and Chris Malgrain. It's a forced perspective shot with Bullet Man's giant right hand reaching toward the viewer like he was palming a basketball. The other arm more proportionate in an upward arched fist. Squinty-eyed, open mouth, with tiny legs partially obscured in the far distance. He only takes up about half the space allotted for the profile box. This is not one of my favorite of these entries.
Yeah, it's not a good use of the space. I mean, if they had just kept that image of him the same with the foreshortening and the hand in the front and all that, and just made the box smaller, and then put more Golden Age artwork around there, it could have worked. Like, you could have put another horizontal Golden Age panel in there, and it would have all worked. But right now, the open space just doesn't work.
Or you make the image bigger at the top and then have the text at the bottom. A little bit more like a who's who, in fact.
You could have done something like that, too. Yeah, there's better ways to lay out this page than what they did here.
Yeah. So, yeah, and the perspective, I respect what he's shooting for, but it's not quite working. I guess we're ready to move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
A long time ago, in a comic book rack far, far away. During the years between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, Marvel Comics kept the Star Wars magic alive, delivering bold new stories, expanding the mythology, and taking our favorite heroes and villains on unforgettable adventures. Now join me, the irredeemable Shag, and an ever-changing roster of guest hosts as we journey back to this incredible era. We begin with a comic adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back, and continue through the thrilling tales leading up to Return of the Jedi. If you're a seasoned Star Wars veteran who knows your share of brie from your hoojibs, or a brave explorer venturing into these comics for the first time, this is your hyperspace lane to classic Star Wars adventure. Join us for Marvel Star Wars, From Empire to Jedi, every other month on the Fire and Water Podcast Network.
Okay, and then from there we have the Wonder Woman hero file, but we've got enough trouble with the Miskerns right now. We're just going to skip right past that.
Smart.
Then we have the story Robin and Huntress Martial Arts by Dennis O'Neil and Marifrian O'Neil, which is, that second name is a lot less familiar to me than the first name.
Given it's an O'Neil, I'm just assuming it's Denny's wife, or...
Correct. She passed away in 2017. Once I sat down to read the story, it was not what I was expecting it to be.
I did not get a chance to reread it, so thanks for making me admit that on the air. Appreciate it.
I didn't mean to do that.
I'm an old man. I fell asleep in the chair last night reading this magazine.
There you go.
It was the penguin jokes that got me.
No worries. You think it's going to be a story. It's like, oh, they're going to be training and they're going to go after somebody together, like a team of stuff. It's literally like she's telling young readers how to meditate. and different techniques for meditation. And basically what Tim is saying is that, well, for sort of Huntress is completely out of characterization. She's way too humble in here. She literally calls herself the third best vigilante in Gotham after Batman and Robin, which honestly may be a little bit of a reach, but I love Huntress, so I'm not going to go there with it. But she was not on good terms with these guys in that time period, and she definitely wouldn't be learning meditation techniques from them. But I like that she wasn't learning how to be a better fighter from Robin, which I don't know, I guess that's debatable. But definitely learning to center yourself and not get too emotional and not go to a place where you're rattled because you're too in the heat of the moment. That sounds like it's applicable to Huntress big time. And certainly teaching kids how to like control their more aggressive emotions and stuff, and to find inner peace even in the midst of turmoil and such. I definitely see value in that. I don't know that many kids would be like, I'm so excited to read about meditation, but I think it's a nice instance of, hiding the vegetables and getting them to eat the vegetables, essentially.
That's pretty cool, actually. I'm just kind of skimming it here. I really dig this. Reminds me a little bit of a tangent again, but a New Titan story when Tim Drake was studying to become Robin. He wasn't allowed to be Robin yet, and he went and hung out with Dick Grayson for the day, and Dick Grayson basically put him in a park and said, sit here. And he made him like sit in a park in one position for like 8 hours, and that's all they could do. And at the end of the 8 hours, he's like, all right, tell me about the person in the red jacket. And like he had to remember everything he saw over the last 8 hours. So he was actually teaching him how to become a detective and how to study, but he was also teaching him patience. So kind of, I don't know, it felt like a little bit of an echo.
Well, and also he didn't tell him what he wanted him to do. He just sat them there to do it. And so part of it's like, okay, well, are you detecting what it is that we're doing here? And also, are you paying attention like you're supposed to be doing? It was a nice little put him on his butt, let him know that as smart as he is, he still has things to learn situation.
Yep.
The penultimate entry, Jenny Sparks, was created by Warren Ellis and Tom Rainey for the first issue of their Stormwatch run, 37, dated July 1996. She was a century baby, a humanoid being born at the stroke of midnight on the first day of a new century, whose existence reflects the moods and attributes of that century, as well as acting as a defense mechanism to defend it. Jenny Sparks was born in England in the year 1900 and lived until the end of 1999, acting as a heroine to protect the 20th century. Jenny's father died when the Titanic sank, and then she went to live with her godfather, Albert Einstein. She's the person who convinced Adolf Hitler to quit painting and try politics instead, such as the life of a century baby. In her teens, she developed electrical powers and stopped aging at 19. Sparks can absorb, manipulate, fire, and transform into electricity. She can travel through power lines and other conductors across great distances in energy form, and she can heal wounds sustained in physical form by converting to energy. She used these abilities to engage in all manner of pulp adventure and superheroics. While working with the British Space Group, Jenny Sparks fought off aliens and an interdimensional invasion, including the Sliding Albion incident of 1953 that triggered the first major wave of metahuman activations in the UK. Across the century, Jenny Sparks became hardened, cynical, and isolated. But in the early 90s, she was convinced by weatherman Henry Bendix to join the subgroup Stormwatch Black. However, the Stormwatch organization began to collapse. Their orbital base Skywatch was destroyed, and Henry Bendix went insane. The United Nations closed Stormwatch down just as the scale of threats to the world escalated. In response, Jenny Sparks executed Bendix and evolved Stormwatch Black into the autonomous supergroup, the Authority. Jenny Sparks came through against one last extinction-level menace before the 20th century died, taking her with it. Jenny's final words to the Authority were, "Save the world, they deserve it, be better, or I'll come back and kick your heads in." Jenny Sparks appeared in 9 issues of the first Stormwatch volume, and 3 issues of the second. She was then in the first year of the Authority through the year 2000. Later that year, Mark Millar and John McCrae featured her in the 5-issue miniseries Jenny Sparks, The Secret History of the Authority. She turned up in many Wildstorm titles, including Planetary, and when various attempts to replace the character lacked the same spark, they just blew off the whole Century Baby concept and brought her back for new stories and various revised continuities. She was in the universe rebooting The Wildstorm, and most recently, a 2024 self-titled 7-issue Black Label miniseries by Tom King and Jeff Spokes. So, any experience with Jenny Sparks from you?
No, actually none whatsoever. And I saw the card, I didn't know who this was, and I read all the entry stuff, and I was like, oh, okay, wait a minute. Authority is one of the comics that, like, everybody has always told me I should read. So I'm a little ashamed to say I have no experience with this character because it sounds like she had quite a career. It was around quite a bit. So nothing there. I will tell you, though, I love the concept of the Century Baby. I love the idea of someone who's born at the beginning of the century, whose job is to protect the century, and then dies at the end of the century. That is such a cool Warren Ellis kind of concept. I dig it.
It's well executed in the story because it's basically Warren Ellis feeling out what he's going to do with Planetary in Stormwatch. And I remember when those books were coming out, I was still a retailer in that time period. I think I got to keep a few of those as strip cover returns, but going like you had that one where they did the multiple variant covers and they did a Watchmen style cover and they did an EC style cover. And she was the star of that issue where it's kind of going over the course of her career. I know people love The Authority. I was never as into that book. I really was interested in Stormwatch. I like that kind of setup. And I thought they were doing a lot of that really interesting planetary stuff within that book, especially with the Ginny Sparks character. So for me, I would much rather read Stormwatch. Plus, I'm just a bigger Tom Rainey fan than I am a Brian Hitch one by magnitudes. I love Tom Rainey's work. And so that run is just, I think, still criminally undervalued. And I love that it gets so much into the history of Wildstorm, where it's giving you the kind of history that DC has as well. One of these British writers backfilling that story. So it fills in those logic gaps and tells you like, okay, well, who was around during this time period and what was going on during that time period? And just seeing the evolution of the century through the Ginny Sparks character and her being all idealistic in the 60s with these flower children superheroes that she's working with. And then when that goes south and then she's doing her whole Watchmen thing where she becomes all cynical. The thing that threw me the most is that I knew she had sparks. Obviously, her name is Ginny Sparks. I'm just not used to seeing her actually using her powers. Whenever I picture Ginny Sparks, it's always her smoking a cigarette, outsmarting somebody. That's who I know her as. She's sort of like the Constantine of Wildstorm. And so it's hard for me to like, obviously, you know, Pete Wisdom, these are all like Warren Ellis type characters. He leaned into it about hardest with her. And so even though it was clear that the concept was supposed to die with the 20th century, people can't let it go because she's one of the coolest characters they ever had. And recently you had the Tom King miniseries where they're fully integrating her into the DC universe. So, you know, it's a black label, so it's not like fully, but, you know, it's still out there because they can't let that character go.
That's funny. They put themselves in a box with a character became too popular. They couldn't get rid of her. All right.
I still think it's one of those things where Warren Ellis was ending his run, and so he didn't want anybody else to touch the character, but everybody still wanted to touch the character, and he doesn't own her. So simple as that.
Speaking of touch the character, Terry Dodson drawing this. Okay, drawing a hot blonde. Yeah, easy mark for me. There we go. Look, the artwork looks great here.
Yeah, the entry was taken from December 1996's Wildstorm Universe 97 #1, written by Warren Ellis. So if you read the text, the author letting you know who this character is. It's inked by Rachel Pinnock, who is not a name you'd be familiar with, but I'm pretty sure she becomes Rachel Dodson later on. That's a name I'm quite familiar with at this point.
Oh, that would make a lot of sense.
It featured Ginny Sparks in a boxer shirt and suspenders with tan pants, a long sleeve overshirt draped across her outstretched arms like a cape. She's levitating, surrounded by a web of electricity emitted from her eyes, hands, and elsewhere. And it's an all right image, but it's just not really. I know Ginny looking a lot different from this. Like, this is sort of like a classical, like, Storm type of image, and she's just not the person who floats around and shoots electricity. She's a different vibe.
You know, this actually kind of reminds me a little bit of, I'm going to get the name wrong. I think it's Electrocute from The Strangers. It was like a attractive blonde with electrical powers. It kind of reminds me of that in this image because that's very 90s, just, I don't know.
You're reminding me, when I went up to Mile High to finish my DC Cosmic card sets, they also were having a sale on, and I picked up all the trading card sets from the Malibu Ultraverse. And
nice.
Particularly that first set with the fluorescent color borders, the fluorescent, like, blood, that is a gorgeous set. Like, just design-wise, I think it's one of the best design card sets I've ever seen.
Don't get me started on Ultraverse. It was such a good imprint. It deserved better.
Yeah, well, and you also have a lot of overlap because you've got James Robinson over there doing his stuff with Firearm and Rafferty and such, and then he moves over and he's doing stuff not only at DC, but similar stuff at Wildstorm. So there is an interconnectivity between these people.
There we go. We'll take it.
Yeah. So the next article is The Man of Steel Speaks, an interview from Beyond the Grave by Jay Maeder and Roger Stern. Grand Comic Database says, Superman reflects on his history and importance as a pop culture figure, as well as his death at the hands of Doomsday, and discusses what lies ahead. I always struggled with the whole, let's do an interview where we're writing on a character's voice thing. So I got through this one, but it was okay. I think that They probably did the best job with it when in the DC Secret Files. I'm a little biased, admittedly, but I think that they came at it through more of a sense of I'm writing a story in which an interview takes place, where in an article like this, it's much more like, oh, I'm going to speak in the voice of Superman. It didn't really work for me.
Well, how awkward is it to launch a brand new magazine called Superman Batman magazine during a time when Superman was dead?
R.I.P. Superman.
It's like a little God, what are you trying to sell me here, kid?
Doesn't that technically just default to Batman magazine? I'm not sure it would sell any worse as Batman magazine.
Well, in the Pogs, in the ad for the earlier Pogs showed Superboy, Connor Superboy. So clearly the marketing was out there in the verse for Reign of the Supermen. So I mean, we're somewhere in that nebulous period where he's still dead, but Reign of the Superman is cranking up. So it's a weird time.
Yeah, definitely an awkward time to try to do anything with Superman, because I remember while that was happening, I was still getting either Advanced Comics or previews. I'm not sure which one. I think Advanced Comics at the time. And I'd look at the solicitations each month, and as long as there was a book that said Superman in the title, I was like, okay, everything's fine. He's coming back. And then that last month, I wasn't seeing it. It's like, okay, what's going on here? And then I finally saw that one Superman Legacy special, one with like Rose and Thorn and stuff. And I was like, okay, there it is. Or maybe it was the Supergirl and Lex Team Luthor. There was a Superman thing. And then right afterwards, then it's like, oh, here comes the Reign of Superman. So they never left us completely without Superman content. But yeah, this is definitely Han and Carbonate kind of situation going on here with this magazine.
It's a good analogy. I like it.
Yeah, not the least bit forced within context. Run that ad. No. Last entry is the Scarab, and probably one of the ones you're going to be most comfortable discussing out of this entire episode.
No, not even remotely. So the Scarab was a Vertigo character, right? And the idea was they wanted to do a Dr. Fate story that was weird and edgy, and DC said, not so much with what you're planning. Make up your own character. And so it's supposed to be this character from the 1940s. I'm not going to go over the history. You can if you'd like. But I kind of remember this thing existed, is really where it ends. It's like, oh yeah, that was a thing. I guess I bought it. I may have dropped it, not finished it. I don't remember. But the thing that always stuck with me strangely is then James Robinson and, oh gosh, what's the other guy's name? For JSA. Moyer, Goyer, they brought him back in their launch as a really odd choice early on in the series, because I guess they said, well, he's a Golden Age character. I'm like, yeah, but Vertigo was like a whole different thing. So it was a strange pick to use him in the JSA launch. I thought that was a little weird.
Do you want to read the card?
No, not really. You can.
Okay, no worries. Scarab was created by John Smith and Scott Eaton for the 1993 8-issue DC Vertigo miniseries of the same name. A man known as Bluebeard owned a house with an interior green door that opened a portal into another dimension called the Subtle Realms, which he pillaged. Bluebeard's young son, Louis Sindak, passively observed this activity. As an adult, Louis was drawn to one particular artifact, the Scarabaeus. On October 6, 1941, it merged with Sindak to create the magical superhuman dubbed Scarab. He teamed up with more established heroes like Dr. Fate to battle supernatural threats during the Golden Age, while also trying to maintain a relationship with his wife, Eleanor. In August of 1944, she asked Louis to take a break from the Scarab to try to conceive, but before that could happen, Eleanor was drawn beyond the green door and lost for decades. Not long after, the other members of Scarab's minor super team, the Seven Shadows, were killed by the villain Johnny Sorrow. Shaken, Louis Sindak retired the Scarab and fruitlessly tried to reach his wife behind the locked green door. In the 90s, Sindak was 78 years old before a metahuman murderer essentially killed him during his own search for the green door. Just then, it finally opened to Eleanor, who was then mortally injured by the killer. Scarab sought help from the Phantom Stranger to save her, and went on a number of misadventures that often involved weird sex stuff. Eventually, the universe got all out of whack. When Eleanor was reborn as some sort of celestial being tied to the labyrinth of the Subtle Realms, she and the de-aged Louis Sindak got down to cosmic rutting. Since this was a creator-owned project, the writer brought in characters from his British 2080 stories that worked for a group called Indigo Prime to overwrite the recent catastrophic events while the series' star was otherwise engaged. With whatever rights DC retained or bought out, Scarab returned to launch the 1999 JSA series, helping to ensure that the sorcerer known then as the Dark Lord did not capture the Helm of Fate for himself. Scarab helped ensure that a new agent of the Lords of Order was selected to take on the Mantle of Fate. Later, Sindak was captured by a returned Johnny Sorrow, who used his body to create a portal for the return of the Lovecraftian god beast, the King of Tears. The Spectre and the JSA eventually dealt with the problem, but Scarab appeared to perish in the ordeal. So this is interesting. I did buy the first issue of this book. I saw it on the stands. It had the Glenn Fabry painted cover. I was digging his stuff on Hellblazer at the time. And it just seemed like an interesting, Vertigo superhero thing. Cool, let me check that out. They even, of course, being the 90s, they gave him silver ink eyes on the cover, which just ruins it. Like, this is a painting.
Of course they did.
And you're putting this stupid ink on top of it. It still grabbed my eyeballs with the rest of it. So I bought the book, took it home, read it. I couldn't make heads or tails of some of what was going on with it, but it just didn't grab me. It didn't interest me. And then for this project, I went through and I skimmed through the series trying to make sense of it. And it's a very horny book. I'm great for the sex positive Vertigo superhero stuff, but it just looked like a mess. And it looks like they never really figured out what they wanted it to be. And it just sort of played out until it got canceled. It seemed like a wank. It just seemed like a thing where they were giving him checks and he just kept doing it until the checks stopped clearing. But it was a hot mess of a book, it seemed like. If
you got to seek out something weird and quirky from the early days of Vertigo that you may not have heard of, skip this book and get Enigma instead.
Yeah, people still talk about Enigma. I did not read that one. It came back into print not that long ago too, right?
Did it really? Oh, it's Peter Milligan. It's really good.
I want to say somebody or they were going to bring it back into print or something. I don't know. It was definitely being discussed, and that's one I completely missed out on. Except for I was getting those Vertigo preview books. They kept putting out preview books or binding them into advanced comics and such. And so I'd read enough of it to be like, oh, okay, I kind of know what that is, and then I never bought the thing.
I didn't realize anyone but me remembered it. So that's cool. It's a fun series.
Yeah, again, that's one of those I feel shamed because I bought stupid Scarab and then 30 years later people were like, oh, but Enigma, that was a good book. And you know what? One of the reasons why Enigma got talked about a lot is it was actually going to be part of the Touchstone line that the Disney was going to do. They wanted to do a mature readers line and it was developed for that line. And then Disney got cold feet and ended up moving the Vertigo. So it was a Vertigo book that was not actually developed at Vertigo.
Fascinating. I had no idea.
So getting back to this guy, though, our reference, just a little bit longer. I really thought that this was going to be your guy, but apparently, nope, didn't work out.
Nope.
So our reference for this entry comes from those beloved 1994 SkyBox, too dang long DC Comics Vertigo trading cards, number 74. Featured painted art by Glenn Fabry, who also provided covers to the miniseries. It's a close-up of Scarab's crusty face and chest, while in his hand is a long-haired glowing human figure, though I can't tell if it's supposed to be Lewis, the guy, or Eleanor, the wife, that inspires him to go on all his little adventures and stuff. I don't know, is it a boy or a girl?
The wife.
You think it's a girl? Okay. Yeah, I mean, none of that means anything to you, though.
I read everything that you had here in the entry, so I understand the premise of the character, but again, didn't grab me back then, certainly doesn't grab me now.
Okay, so we won't be waiting for that episode of JSA in the 90s then.
You can keep waiting for it.
This is it. This is the de facto version. Okay. Finally, we've got Backstage at DC Comics, The Man Behind the Man of Steel by Steve Freitag, and with a caricature of Mike Carlin by John Bogdanove. GCD writes, Carlin discusses being editor of Superman books for DC, which that sort of thing I find interesting. I like it when it's like break down what I do for little kids. I think it's a really cool caricature. And I love that they get into stuff like how they manufactured the armbands for the Memorial to Superman issue and all that kind of good stuff.
It's cute. And it's nice to see an interview done pretty much at the same time by the man who killed my favorite Justice Society of America series. And this was done right about the time he did that. So there we go.
I'm sure that you're not trying to draw your editor in an unflattering light, but you can definitely take it that way if you're inclined to. Bit of a Sally Jesse Raphael thing going on with the glasses, too.
Oh, he totally does. I see that.
Out of all these that we did, who were your favorite files?
Oh, actually, Grim Reaper, by far. Now, again, I don't know how much I love the character versus the entry that you provided, with all the fake history, but I loved the Grim Reaper. I thought that the Spy Smasher was a very close second. But I will say, those both appeal to me in sort of a kitschy, cool, retro way. I will say the Jenny Sparks entry has me the most intrigued, the one I'd like to learn the most about, though.
Yeah, I think they've done some compendiums and stuff and the Stormwatch stuff. I haven't heard anything about the Tom King miniseries. I don't know if people like it or not. It's nobody I know is reading the thing.
Well, it's Tom King, so I'm sure it's not controversial at all.
Certainly not. Well, and it's Tom King writing like Superman and Batman and stuff in an alternate history and under Black Label terms. So yeah, I'm sure somebody somewhere is fuming over that thing. So for me, I agree. I really like the Grim Reaper entry. I also like both of the SkyBox Vertigo cards, Dian, Belmont, and Scarab. But definitely favoring Scarab just because I'm a big Glenn Fabry guy, especially in that time period.
I love me some Glenn Fabry. It's just not this.
You don't like the artwork on that one?
I mean, I guess it's fine. Again, it's because it's tied to the character. Give me 17 issues of Hellblazer to look at by Glenn Fabry, and I'll take those every day over this.
We made it through the 10 target entries before my time with Shag was being called to a close.
Okay, so it looks like my lawyer's here to make the final arrangements for my release. Why don't you go out to the lobby, and we can pick this up on the way back to Florida?
Seemed like a good idea. So I busied myself with the latest confidential communiques. All Around Arbiter, Ascani Sun 22, The Bat Pod, Between the Pages blog, Billy Hines, Comics Enabler, Captain Entropy, Chris at Bat Books for Beginners, Chris Pine, Christopher Irving, who skeeted, referring to Untold Legend of the Batman. Thank goodness DC had the decency to reprint it last year. What a great forgotten gem of an origin story. Dave's Comic Heroes blog, Dr. Ange, Ed Moore at Teal Productions, Frank N. Furter, Great Rebel Dragon, The Hammer Strikes, Random Geeky Stuff, Hicks, who added, Captain Entropy is inevitable, Illustep, Imaginate Design, The Irredeemable Shag, Jarrett Keene, Jim Imbruglia, SCTV Forever, Jonathan Wilkins, Justice Society Presents, Justice Trek, Keith G. Baker, King Dinosaur, Krypton Kylie, Luminous, Lurk McGurk, Mark Gray, Mijadane, Mr. Boyce Jr., Movie Matt Saroyce, Nevermore, Relatively Geeky Podcast Network, St. Piers, Scott X, Stephen E. Shend, The Telltale Mind, This Lightsaber Kills Fascists, Tim Price, The Podcrasher, and Ward Hill Terry. Okay, so now that we've revealed our secret files, it's time for your orations. Let us hear your thoughts. Share your opinions by recording an audio file that we can run on the air. Email us at rolledspinepodcast on gmail.com. Leave a comment on the Rolled Spine devoted blog for this episode, or maybe on the Tumblr gallery. Tweet us at Rolled Spine on Twitter, or Skeet Diablo Frank me on Blue Sky. I'll be honest, I never had the password for the Facebook page. I can't access that stuff. Don't talk to us on Facebook, please. Why don't you tell the listeners where you can find more Shag on the internets?
Sure, you can find me on the social medias as well on, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter, whatever I'm forgetting, Threads. Most of those you can find me as Once Upon a Geek or JSA, just JSA Presents. So, but the best place to find me though is on podcasts, which is over on the Fire and Water Podcast Network. You can find me on shows such as JSA in the 90s, which is my monthly show where I'm diving into the Justice Society of America and their adventures in the 1990s. And that's part of the Justice Society Presents podcast feed with a bunch of shows on there. You can also find me on Once Upon a Geek. That's a podcast where I talk about whatever I want to talk about, and I do that every other month. And a few times a year, me and Frank get together, actually, and talk about Blue Devil from the 1980s, and we love that. Then, depending on when this comes out, I will either have just launched or about to launch, I'm not really sure, a new podcast called Marvel Star Wars From Empire to Jedi, which I will be covering all the old Marvel comics from the 80s, literally starting with Empire Strikes Back. We'll cover all the issues up through Return of the Jedi. It's pretty straightforward. It's right there in the name. And we're going to be covering all those awesome David Michelini and Walt Simonson comics, which are just near and dear to my heart. We're going to have an absolute blast doing that. That's going to be an every other month show. And then you can also find me on FW Team Up. Now, that's a monthly show, but I'm only on it quarterly, discussing Marvel Team Up with Spider-Man. Oh, and of course, there's some other little show called Who's Who, the definitive podcast of the DC Universe, that comes out about 4 times a year, that you can find me on, that apparently this show was blatantly ripped off from.
Yeah, and it's I thank you so much for coming on to your ripoff. It definitely makes the show more real. I feel like it's properly inaugurated by having you here. I still want to do some with Rob as well, and I'm really glad that he was able to at least get in on the little narrative thread that we do on the show. But having the Who's Who, the real Who's Who guys on my fake show makes it feel a little bit more real to me.
Well, I really appreciate you having me over here to talk about Soldier and Scarab. Thank you so very much.
I promise I have every intention of having you back on, and I'm going to let you actually pick who you talk about next time, as opposed to you literally had no choice in any of these selections. None of that part is your fault. Next time, we're going to I'm sure you'll be back for like some 90s thing, and we'll talk about some horrible 90s thing that nobody else wants to hear about, but you and me will be able to riff on.
When you actually get to the secret file, I'm gonna paraphrase Jurassic Park. You are eventually gonna have Secret Files and Origins on your Secret Files and Origins podcast, right? You're gonna actually get to those books someday.
Yeah. So the schedule had to took a few hits here and there, and so strange things got pulled to the front where the DC Secret Files got pushed back a little bit. Plus, just as part of the conceit of trying to do sort of a chronological order of like laying the groundwork for where DC was before the DC Secret Files get started, means going to other sources, since all the Secret Files took place for the most part in a future time that we're not there yet for. Thankfully, we had the Golden Age available, and we've got some other stuff that is coming up fairly soon that will address some other ages. Wink, wink. Anybody who's looking forward to certain editions. So we haven't completely forgotten about it, but we did have to make some changes to fit the conceit. But trust me, we will actually have Secret Files on the DC Secret Files podcast soon enough.
All right. Well, that's when you can invite me back, when we actually have the Secret Files comics to talk about, because that's what I want to do, because I love those things, man. I'm pretty sure I bought every single one.
Yeah, I got most of them. If they didn't have profiles, I wasn't so much interested in them. But yeah. I for the vast majority, they were must-buys. What will the topic be next month? Sorry, folks. They wouldn't be Secret Files if I just gave them away. You'll just have to do your part by listening to each episode. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. I've been Frank.
And I'm Shag.
As always, we leave you with a question for the next episode.
Do you want to hear a secret?
I was in an antechamber between the meeting rooms and the main exit when I saw a group of men in black suits escorting a shackled man with a bag over his head.
Frank, help, Frank! I can't see where they're taking me. What's going on? Is this the way to Waffle House? Frank!
There was nothing I could do in this moment for Shag, as I'd surrendered my firearm and D.E.O. credentials before being allowed access to the facility. However, while everyone was distracted by the spectacle, I was able to reach a loading dock ahead of the group that bypassed the security checkpoint. I looked like I belonged, and had flashed my badge to everyone that mattered on the way in. That was enough to get me to the street with my secret files. But I figured if Shag was getting railroaded, I was next in line on the train tracks.
Hey Frank, over here. Get in. There's spooks all over the area. We have to move now.
The NBI had arranged my transport to the compound, but while I was in Gotham City, I'd worked out a backup option with Captain Entropy in case I had trouble getting out again. Always have an exit strategy, but where we go from here is going to take some more planning.